Chapter 1891. When Yi Xian woke up, his head felt like it was filled with lead. It was extremely heavy. Yi Xian shook his head with all his might. After his head cleared up a little, he slowly opened his eyes and looked around. At that moment, he was in the middle of a battlefield. There were corpses and blood everywhere. The air was filled with the nauseating smell of blood and the smell of rotting corpses. Where is this? Yi Xian frowned. Where did Pop send me to? As if he thought of something, Yi Xian closed his eyes. After a while, his face turned ugly. He couldn't contact Little Hun. The green profound sword was really sealed. At that moment, a weak voice suddenly sounded in front of Yi Xian. Young master, it was Xiao Ta's voice. Yi Xian looked at his chest. Xiao Ta was lying on his chest. At that moment, Xiao Ta was in a miserable state. His whole body was cracked. It could be said that he was covered with cuts and bruises. Yi Xian shook his head and sighed. Xiao Ta, I don't think I'm fit to be your young master. Actually, he was also speechless. This Xiao Ta was too arrogant. He actually dared to talk back to Pops. Was he crazy? Who was Pops? Based on the current situation, Pops was also an invincible existence. At that moment, Xiao Ta suddenly said in a deep voice, there's still a gap between me and Master. Yi Xian shook his head. This Xiao Ta was already hopeless. A gap? He was so thick-skinned that even he was about to concede defeat. At that moment, Xiao Ta said again, young master, what should we do now? What should we do? Yi Xian looked around helplessly. What else can we do? From now on, I'll be a low-key person and you'll be a low-key pagoda. Xiao Ta said in a deep voice, I think, under the three swords, young master and I are still invincible. Yi Xian immediately fainted. This Xiao Ta was hopeless. Suddenly, footsteps sounded from behind him. Yi Xian was startled and turned around. Not far away, a woman was slowly walking over. Not human. Although she wasn't human, her appearance wasn't much different from a human's. However, the woman's ears were a little like a fox's, and they were furry. His hair was not black, but blue. Behind the woman, there were a few burly men. Yi Xian was secretly on his guard. His father would definitely not send him to a world with an extremely low level of civilization. This place was at least a level 7 civilization. As for the woman in front of him, he could not see through her at all. The woman sized up Yi Xian and spoke. However, Yi Xian had no idea what she was talking about. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment. Miss, can you speak human language? Hearing Yi Xian's words, the woman frowned. A moment later, a voice sounded in Yi Xian's mind. What kind of creature are you? Why are you here? Divine sense communication. Yi Xian's expression became even more solemn. She was actually able to enter his divine sense without a sound. When she saw that Yi Xian didn't reply, the woman frowned slightly. Why aren't you replying? When he saw that the woman's expression was hostile, Yi Xian hurriedly said, human. Human? The woman sized up Yi Xian again and said, I've never heard of you. Yi Xian glanced at the woman. How should I address you, miss? The woman looked at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian was in a difficult position. This woman wouldn't have taken a liking to me, right? At this moment, the woman suddenly said, you humans are too ugly. Yi Xian was speechless. The woman continued, not only are you ugly, but you're also so weak. At this moment, Xiao Ta suddenly said, young master, how can we tolerate this? Hit her. Yi Xian directly disregarded Xiao Ta. He cupped his fists and said, Miss, where are we? The woman gazed at Yi Xian, you don't know where we are? Yi Xian nodded. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. Then why have you appeared here? Yi Xian was about to speak when the sky in the distance suddenly seethed. Yi Xian turned around and looked over. A powerful wave of pressure swept over from afar, and then a man walked out from within space. The man wore golden armor and held a spear in his hand. Moreover, a pair of wings grew on his back, and as they flapped, the space around him rippled like water. The woman's expression instantly turned cold when she saw this man, and the expressions of the two experts behind her became solemn. The armored man's gaze descended onto the woman, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Miss Arrow Sheng, what a coincidence. The woman called Arrow Sheng chuckled lightly. Yen Emperor, looks like your Yen clan is interested in this restricted area as well. Yen Huang laughed. Likewise. Arrow Sheng smiled faintly. Shall we cooperate? Yen Huang glanced at Arashing and said with a smile, sure. Arrow Sheng turned to Yi Xian. You're new here, and I believe you have nowhere to go. Why don't you follow me? What do you think? Yi Xian quickly shook his head, and was about to refuse when Arrow Sheng spoke again. This place is called 10 Directions Impasse. Do you see the corpses around you? They were all 18 stages when they were alive. 18 stages. Yi Xian's expression changed. Damn it. What kind of damned place did my dad send me to? 18 stages are like ants? This is my real dad. Yi Xian was speechless. Arrow Sheng asked again, what do you think? Yi Xian looked at Arrow Sheng. I'll follow you. Arrow Sheng smiled and looked at Yen Huang. Let's go. Yen Huang looked at Yi Xian and nodded. The group started walking away. They had only taken a few steps when the ground on their right suddenly trembled. The next moment, a rotten corpse suddenly broke through the ground and headed straight for Arashing and the others. Wherever this rotten corpse passed, the seventh layer of space-time was directly shattered and annihilated. Seeing this, Yi Xian's expression changed. What the hell is this? How could it be so terrifying? Yen Huang suddenly stabbed out with his spear. Boom! The zombie was erased by the spear. Instant kill. Yi Xian took a deep look at the Yen Emperor and Aluo Sheng, who were leading the group. The strength of these two people might have reached level 20. What kind of place is this? Yi Xian frowned. He was a little worried about his own survival at the moment. He was only at 10th stage now, and the green profound sword was sealed by his dad. Right now, he was too weak, way too weak. That rotten corpse just now could have killed him in an instant. My dear dad. Yi Xian sighed. His dad only knew to send him to a dangerous place. He definitely didn't think about how dangerous this place was or his current strength. At this moment, the Yen Emperor and Arashing, who were in the lead, suddenly stopped. Yi Xian looked around and frowned. His instincts told him that there was danger. As soon as this thought came to mind, the space around them suddenly trembled. Then, the space around them started to corrode bit by bit. Danger. Yi Xian's expression became serious. What kind of place is this? At this moment, the Yen Emperor suddenly stomped his right foot lightly. Boom! The wings on the Yen Emperor's back suddenly flapped, and in an instant, the space he was in was directly enveloped by a mysterious airflow. At the same time, Arlasheng suddenly pressed down with her right hand, and in an instant, the space she and the two old men behind her were in was enveloped by a layer of golden light. As if thinking of something, Arrow Sheng looked at Yi Xian. Right now, the space around Yi Xian was completely corroded. In a few breaths, he would disappear from this world. Yi Xian's expression was calm, but he was panicking inside. What should I do? He wanted to summon the green profound sword, but he couldn't sense little soul. At this moment, Arashing, who was next to him, suddenly pressed down lightly with her right hand, and Yi Xian was instantly enveloped by a golden light. Yi Xian relaxed. He looked at Arrow Sheng and smiled. Thank you. Arrow Sheng smiled. You're welcome. Yen Huang glanced at Yi Xian but didn't say anything. Hee hee. Right at this moment, a cold and strange laughter suddenly sounded from the side. Yi Xian turned his head to look. Not far away, the ground there suddenly split open. Then, a skeleton slowly floated out. The skeleton held a bone blade in its hand. Seeing this skeleton, Arrow Sheng frowned. Undead Emperor. The skeleton looked at Arrow Sheng. You know of me? Arrow Sheng looked at the undead emperor. 1,000,000 years ago, I was invincible in the realm of Seamless. Haha. The undead emperor laughed. I didn't think that after 1,000,000 years, someone would still know of me. Not bad, not bad. Aluo Sheng said in a deep voice, why are you here? The undead emperor smiled. I want to obtain the 10 Directions God Emperor's inheritance. Arosa's gaze fell upon the undead emperor's feet. There was a blood-red chain around the undead emperor's feet. Seeing this, Arrow Sheng's expression darkened. Retreat. Retreat. Just as she was about to leave with the 2 elders behind her, the space around them suddenly turned blood-red. Then, countless blood-red chains suddenly flew out from the space around them. The Yen Emperor in the lead narrowed his eyes. He suddenly leaped up and slashed down with the spear in his hand. However, this attack was completely useless. A blood-red chain pierced through the center of his brows and forcefully locked him on the spot. On the other side, Arrow Sheng was about to leave with the 2 elders behind her, but she was too slow. 3 blood-red chains locked the 3 of them in place. They didn't even have a chance to resist. Yi Xian, on the other hand, was more sensible. When the blood-red chains appeared, he stretched out his hands and obediently let the blood-red chains lock him up. No resistance. Surrender. Right at this moment, the sound of footsteps suddenly rang out from the side. Everyone turned around to look, and they saw a little girl walking over slowly from nearby. The little girl wasn't wearing shoes, and she wore a red dress. Upon closer inspection, the dress was formed from blood. On the right side of the little girl's face, there was a deep scar that made the little girl look somewhat ferocious. In the little girl's right hand, there was a dagger made of blood. Seeing the little girl, the undead emperor immediately knelt on the ground and trembled. The little girl walked in front of the fire emperor. She looked up at him and opened her palm. 10 billion soul crystals. Seeing this, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. Damn, is this a female bandit? But what the hell is a soul crystal? The fire emperor looked at the little girl. None. The little girl suddenly waved her right hand. In an instant, the fire emperor was directly dismembered into tens of thousands of pieces. Even his soul was dismembered. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. That's it? Such a powerful super expert was killed just like that? The little girl walked in front of Arrow Sheng. She looked at Arrow Sheng and opened her right hand. 10 billion. Arrow Sheng was silent for a moment. I don't have it on me. Can I have someone send it over? The little girl nodded. Sure. As she said this, she looked at the 2 elders behind Arrow Sheng. The 2 elders hurriedly looked at Arrow Sheng. Arrow Sheng remained silent. 1,000,000 soul crystals. This number was simply too large. What were soul crystals? They were soul essences condensed from souls. Most importantly, not all souls could be condensed into soul essences. Only those who had reached at least the 15th phase could condense soul crystals. 1,000,000 soul crystals. This meant that at least 1,000,000 15th phase and above experts had to be killed. Seeing that Arrow Sheng didn't say anything, the 2 elders' faces turned ashen. At this time, the little girl waved her right hand and the 2 elders were dismembered into tens of thousands of pieces. The little girl walked in front of Yi Xian. When she saw Yi Xian, she frowned. So weak? Yi Xian, the little girl stretched out her right hand. 1,000,000 soul crystals. Yi Xian shook his head. I don't have it. The little girl looked at Yi Xian. Have someone send it over. Yi Xian didn't say anything. The little girl was about to move. At this time, Yi Xian hurriedly said, "I'll have someone send it over." As he said this, he slowly closed his eyes. Xiaoling, tell Xiao Bai to contact Dad and tell him that I've been kidnapped. Have him pay 2 million soul crystals to redeem me. A moment later, in an unknown galaxy, a man in a green robe suddenly stopped. Beside him, the swordsman asked, "What's wrong?" The green-robed man was expressionless. "He's been kidnapped. Let me pay him back." The swordsman. Chapter 1892. He was kidnapped. Swordsman's expression was a little strange. The green-robed man sighed softly. "This guy," Swordsman smiled. "He must have encountered some kind of trouble. Should we go and take a look?" The green-robed man hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "Let him solve it himself," Swordsman said. "He probably can't solve it, that's why he came to you." The green-robed man shook his head and sighed. "Brother Xiao, we don't have much time. He must grow up. If Tianming and I still help him like this, he will never grow up." Swordsman thought for a moment, then nodded. "That's true," the green-robed man said. "Let's go." Swordsman hesitated for a moment, then said, "Let's wait and see." Swordsman shook his head and smiled. Clearly, the green-robed man was still worried. 10th extremity. The little girl in the red dress sat on a rock, her 2 little feet swaying gently. In her hand, there was a half-eaten spirit fruit. In front of the little girl, the undead emperor was dancing. That's right. A skeleton was dancing, and it was quite a good dance. It had to be said that the scene was very strange. Meanwhile, Arrow Shing's expression was extremely solemn. Who was this undead emperor? 1,000,000 years ago, he was already invincible in the Seamless Realm. And now, such an invincible powerhouse was actually dancing here. Who was this little girl in the red dress? Was she the 10th God Emperor? Arrow Shing's heart was full of doubts, but she didn't dare to ask for fear of angering the little girl. Not long after, an old man came to the 10th extremity. The old man walked in front of Arrow Shing and respectfully handed over a storage ring. Inside the ring, there were 10 billion soul crystals. Arrow Shing handed the storage ring to the little girl. The little girl glanced at it, then put it away and said, "Let's go." Arrow Shing nodded slightly, then turned and left. When passing by Yi Xian, she suddenly stopped and turned to look at Yi Xian. "Where's your family?" Hearing this, Yi Xian suddenly felt sad. Because his father didn't reply. Arrow Shing gently patted Yi Xian's shoulder. "Take care." With that, she quickly disappeared into the distance without looking back. At this moment, the little girl looked at Yi Xian and did not say anything. Yi Xian didn't say anything. At this time, the little girl got up and walked in front of Yi Xian. The spirit fruit in her hand had turned into a dagger. It was this dagger that had dismembered the Yan Emperor into tens of thousands of pieces. The little girl looked at Yi Xian. "Pauper." As she spoke, she was about to attack. However, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Wait." The little girl stared at Yi Xian without saying anything, but Yi Xian could already feel a terrifying killing intent. Yi Xian opened his palm, and Xiao Ta appeared in his hand. "Take a look and see if this is worth 10 billion soul crystals." Xiao Ta immediately jumped up. "Young master, you're too much. You actually sold it to me." Yi Xian, in front of Yi Xian, the little girl glanced at Xiao Ta and frowned. After a while, she shook her head. "It's not worth it." Hearing this, Xiao Ta was furious. "You actually said that I'm not worth it? I'm the #1 pagoda in the universe." Yi Xian hurriedly nodded. "The #1 pagoda in the universe, I can testify." The little girl sized up Xiao Ta and shook her head again. "It's useless." "Yi Xian, Xiao Ta still wanted to say something, but the little girl suddenly slashed down with her dagger. Boom! Xiao Ta trembled violently and was directly sent flying. However, he was not damaged. The little girl frowned slightly when she witnessed this scene. She opened her palm, and the tiny pagoda appeared in her hand. She sized up the tiny pagoda, and in the next moment, she entered the tiny pagoda's world. In Xiao Ta's world, the little girl looked around. Very quickly, she seemed to have discovered something, and her brows furrowed again. After a while, the little girl's eyes narrowed. She discovered a seal. The seal left behind by the green-robed man. Suddenly, the little girl slashed down with her dagger. Boom! The surrounding space suddenly shook violently, but that seal did not have any reaction. After a moment of silence, the little girl left Xiao Ta. She just looked at Yi Xian, not saying anything. Yi Xian's scalp went numb from her stare. This woman had no way of breaking the seal left behind by his father, but she was definitely not someone he could fight against at the moment. The little girl suddenly turned around and left. Yi Xian frowned, a little confused. At the side, the undead emperor took a deep look at Yi Xian, and then hurriedly followed after the little girl. Yi Xian was a little confused. Why did the little girl suddenly stop? He had actually already felt this little girl's killing intent. She wanted to kill him, but for some reason, she stopped. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian decided to escape. He had just taken a few steps when a voice suddenly spoke up from the side. If I were you, I would stay here. Yi Xian turned around and saw that the undead emperor had returned. Yi Xian asked in a low voice, "Why?" The undead emperor said calmly, "There are undead everywhere outside. If you go out, you will be instantly dismembered." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then asked, "Senior, who is that little girl?" The undead emperor shook her head. "I don't know." Yi Xian frowned. "You don't know?" The undead emperor nodded. "I have been here for 800,000 years, but I know nothing about her." 800,000 years. Upon hearing this, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. This girl had been imprisoned here for 800,000 years. The undead emperor glanced at Yi Xian. "I don't know why she hasn't killed you, but remember, don't make her angry. Don't ever make her angry. Otherwise, the consequences will be severe." After saying this, the undead emperor turned around and left. Yi Xian raised his head and saw a black cloud floating above his head. Apart from that, there was nothing else. A moment later, Yi Xian walked off into the distance. After passing through a narrow cave, Yi Xian's expression drastically changed. Not too far away from him was a boundless sea of blood. He couldn't even see the end of it, and the little girl was sitting right next to the sea of blood. The undead emperor followed her from afar. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before walking over to the little girl's side. Seeing this, the undead emperor's mouth twitched. Was this guy trying to get himself killed? In the distance, the little girl turned to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian directly took out a stick of candied hawthorn and handed it to the little girl. The little girl furrowed her eyebrows. "What is it?" Yi Xian said in a serious tone, "Candied hawthorn." The little girl glanced at Yi Xian, but didn't say anything. Yi Xian hurriedly said, "It's delicious." After a moment of silence, the little girl accepted the candied hawthorn and licked it. Her eyes instantly widened, and the next moment, she hurriedly licked it again. Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Damn, this candied hawthorn was truly a divine artifact. Fortunately, he had prepared several bundles of candied hawthorn. It could save his life at a critical moment. Yi Xian looked at the little girl. "Does it taste good?" The little girl nodded. "Sure." Yi Xian took out another candied hawthorn and handed it to the little girl. "Eat this candied hawthorn, and we'll be good friends from now on." This caused the undead emperor to widen her eyes in shock. Had this guy gone crazy? Become friends with this little girl? At this moment, the little girl took the candied hawthorn from Yi Xian's hands. Friends? Yi Xian nodded. Do you have any friends? The little girl shook her head. No. Yi Xian hurriedly said, then I'll be your friend from now on. The little girl glanced at Yi Xian. Okay. The undead emperor almost fainted upon hearing this. Friends? Damn. This guy used a candied hawthorn to become friends with this little girl? The undead emperor felt like his brain wasn't enough to process this. Yi Xian sat down next to the little girl and smiled. My name is Yi Xian. What's your name? The little girl said, Blood Eye. Blood Eye. Yi Xian smiled and then asked, can you leave? Blood Eye shook his head. No. Yi Xian said in a low voice, there's a barrier? Blood Eye nodded. Yes. Yi Xian frowned. You're so powerful, but you can't break it? Blood Eye said softly, I'm injured. Injured. Yi Xian sized up Blood Eye and then said, how long will it take for you to recover? Blood Eye shook his head. I won't recover. Yi Xian didn't quite understand. Why? Blood Eye turned to glance at Yi Xian but didn't say anything. Yi Xian was about to speak when Blood Eye suddenly said, friends? Yi Xian looked at Blood Eye, and Blood Eye stared back at Yi Xian. You and I are friends? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Blood Eye nodded slightly. Friends should help each other, right? Yi Xian was just about to nod when he suddenly realized that something was off. Seeing that Yi Xian didn't reply, Blood Eye narrowed his eyes. You don't treat me as a friend? In an instant, the nearby sea of blood started to seethe, and boundless killing intent filled the entire sky. Off to the side, the undead emperor immediately crawled down and trembled in fear. Yi Xian hurriedly said, friend. We're good friends. Blood Eye nodded slightly, and the sea of blood instantly calmed down. Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. This little girl's strength is truly terrifying. At this moment, Blood Eye suddenly said, I want to ask you for a favor. Yi Xian's expression froze. His intuition told him that he'd been tricked. Blood Eye turned to look at Yi Xian. A small favor. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before saying, I'm a little weak. Blood Eye looked directly at Yi Xian. Are you going to help me or not? Yi Xian felt quite helpless. Tell me. Blood Eye looked at Yi Xian. Who left the seal within Xiao Ta's body? Yi Xian's expression became solemn when he heard this. At this moment, he understood why the little girl hadn't killed him. So it was because of his father. Blood Eye asked again. Who? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, I know what you mean, but I can't contact him. Even if I could, he wouldn't come. Blood Eye frowned slightly. Who is he to you? Yi Xian felt quite helpless. My father. Blood Eye stared at Yi Xian. Biological father? Yi Xian nodded. Blood Eye fell silent for a moment before he said, put on a show. Just say that I want to kill you and ask him to save you. What do you think? Yi Xian said helplessly, I tried just now. He didn't even pay attention to me. Blood Eye frowned slightly. Are you sure he's your biological father? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he said, I'm not very sure. Shuetong fell silent for a moment before he said, I suggest you change your father. Yi Xian was speechless. P.S. Please vote. Any ticket is fine. Chapter 1893. Change father? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly. How could he change his father whenever he wanted? At this moment, Small Tower suddenly snorted coldly and said, Master is just not kind. He always says that you rely too much on big sister Tianming and him, but he never thinks about one problem, and that is young master, your enemy. Master didn't have so many powerful enemies back then, but young Master, your enemies have always been abnormal. Look, young Master, you're only at the 10th phase now, but the enemies you're facing are all at the 20th phase. How are you going to play? Yi Xian smiled. Actually, I can understand father. Xiao Ta was puzzled. Understand? He treats you like this, and you still understand him? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, I can't deny that I rely too much on Qing. Look at me now, without the profound azure sword, I'm like a lamb, waiting to be slaughtered. Xiao Ta was silent. Yi Xian said softly, I need to change myself. In some unknown part of the starry sky, the man in green suddenly withdrew his gaze and laughed. Brother Xiao, let's go. After saying that, he laughed and disappeared at the end of the starry sky. Beside the blood sea, Shui Tong didn't speak anymore. She sat on a rock and licked her candied haws, then looked at the distant blood sea. Yi Xian walked to the side, opened his palm, and a sword appeared in his hand. He slowly closed his eyes, and gradually, he fused with the 6th layer of time and space. Without the profound azure sword, he could still fuse with the 6th layer of time and space. However, he didn't dare to be as unscrupulous as before, because the current him not only couldn't ignore the spacetime abyss, but he also couldn't ignore the spacetime pressure of the 6th layer of time and space. When seeing Yi Xian enter the 6th layer of time and space, the undead emperor frowned. You're only at the 10th phase, how can you enter the 6th layer of time and space? And fuse with it? Yi Xian was puzzled. Senior can't enter the 6th layer of time and space at the 10th phase? The undead emperor looked at Yi Xian. No. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why not? The undead emperor growled. What I want to know is how you are able to do this. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, I just gave it a try, and then I fused with it. The undead emperor, Yi Xian asked, Senior, what realm is the seamless realm that Miss Aroshing mentioned? The undead emperor glanced at Yi Xian, then said, after the 20th phase, if you continue to improve your power, you'll be at the seamless level. There was no space, and there was no time. In other words, the 8th layer of space. The 8th layer of spacetime is also called the seamless space. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Senior, when I entered the 8th spacetime, I saw someone who looked exactly like me. That was... The undead emperor suddenly interrupted Yi Xian. You've entered the 8th heaven? Yi Xian nodded. Yeah. The undead emperor stared at Yi Xian. Are you joking? Yi Xian shook his head. No. The undead emperor said in a deep voice, You've really been there before? Yi Xian nodded. I've been there before. The undead emperor looked deeply at Yi Xian. You're very abnormal. He believed Yi Xian's words, because if Yi Xian hadn't entered the 8th layer of spacetime, he wouldn't know what it was like in the 8th layer of spacetime. But what he didn't understand was, how did this guy get in there? Yi Xian suddenly asked, Senior, what is seamless? The undead emperor fell silent for a moment, then said, I don't know how to explain it to you. The current your realm is a bit low. Also, your aura is a bit weak and unstable. It's obvious that you've taken a shortcut. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. This was a real boss. The undead emperor asked again, You're a swordsman? Yi Xian nodded. A swordsman. The undead emperor laughed. I once knew a swordsman and had a few exchanges with him. He had some insights into the way of the sword. Come, show me a sword technique, and I'll give you some pointers. Yi Xian nodded, then suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Sword draw to decide life and death. 2,800 stacked sword draws to decide life and death. This sword strike tore the space around them apart. Shui Tong suddenly turned his head to look at Yi Xian and frowned. When the undead emperor saw Yi Xian's sword strike, his expression instantly became serious. You. Who taught you this sword technique? Yi Xian said seriously, I created it myself. Created it himself. The undead emperor paused for a moment, then said, "You created this sword technique yourself?" Yi Xian nodded. "That's right." The undead emperor looked deeply at Yi Xian. "Impressive." Yi Xian said, "I also have another sword technique." After saying that, he directly used sword draw to decide life and death. When the undead emperor saw this sword strike, his expression became even more serious. "You created this as well?" Yi Xian nodded. "That's right. I spent 10 days to create it." The undead emperor was speechless. Actually, Yi Xian wasn't trying to show off. He had only used these two sword techniques to protect himself. The more extraordinary his performance was, the greater his chances of survival. At this moment, the undead emperor said in a low voice, "Little brother, your background isn't simple at all." Yi Xian said seriously, "Please teach me, senior." After a moment of silence, the undead emperor said, "I don't have the qualifications to teach you this sword technique, but I do have some personal insights." Yi Xian hurriedly bowed respectfully. "Please teach me, senior." The undead emperor said in a low voice, "Your realm is on the low side. If you reach the 20th stage, with that sword technique of yours, you can be said to be almost invincible within the 20th stage. You can even fight against seamless realm powerhouses. So, you must first break through your own realm and raise yourself to the 20th stage." Yi Xian nodded. "All right." The undead emperor hesitated for a moment, then said, "But if you want to reach the 20th stage, you must have soul crystals. You need at least 500,000 soul crystals." Yi Xian was a little confused. "What are soul crystals?" The undead emperor was a little confused. "You don't know what soul crystals are?" Yi Xian nodded. "I don't know." The undead emperor had a rather strange expression on his face. Moments later, he said, "A soul crystal refers to a soul essence condensed from one's soul. This soul essence's energy is incredibly terrifying, far more powerful than some crystals. From a certain standpoint, a single soul crystal is equivalent to a person's life's work. The more powerful one's soul is, the more powerful the soul essence will be. If you want to reach the 20th stage, you need at least 500,000 soul crystals." 500,000 soul crystals. Yi Xian looked at the undead emperor, who stretched out his hands. "Don't even think about it. I don't even have a single strand of hair." Yi Xian sized up the undead emperor. Indeed, he did not have a single strand of hair, only bones. The undead emperor glanced at Crimson Eye, but did not say anything. Yi Xian naturally understood what he meant. He looked at Crimson Eye. This girl must have a lot of soul crystals. Crimson Eye glanced at Yi Xian. "A stick of candied hawthorn for 10,000 soul crystals." Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. A stick of candied hawthorn for 10,000 soul crystals. At this moment, Crimson Eye asked again, "Do you want to trade?" Yi Xian thought for a moment before saying, 2 sticks of candied hawthorn for 10,000 soul crystals." Crimson Eye looked at Yi Xian. "Why?" Yi Xian said seriously, "Because we're friends. If 1 stick of candied hawthorn for 10,000 soul crystals, my conscience would ache. The reason why my life has been full of ups and downs is because I'm too honest." Sigh. Beside him, the undead emperor's mouth twitched slightly. He wanted to hit someone. Perhaps Crimson Eye did not recognize candied hawthorn, but how could he not recognize it? 2 sticks of candied hawthorn for 10,000 soul crystals. Damn it, this guy was crazy. At this moment, he felt quite sullen. Damn it, if he had known that this boss Crimson Eye liked eating candied hawthorn, he would not have ended up like this. Thinking of this, he could not help but feel sorrow. Hundreds of thousands of years. He had relied on dancing to please this boss Crimson Eye for the past hundreds of thousands of years, but this human had used candied hawthorn to befriend this boss Crimson Eye. Candied hawthorn. Damn it, why hadn't he brought some candied hawthorn? Not far away, Crimson Eye looked at Yi Xian. After a moment of silence, she said, "You're not bad." As she spoke, she waved her right hand, and 100,000 soul crystals appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian hurriedly took out 5 sticks of candied hawthorn and gave them to Crimson Eye. He thought for a moment before taking out an extra stick and giving it to Crimson Eye. "I'll give you one more." Crimson Eye glanced at Yi Xian. She accepted the candied hawthorn and said, "Thank you." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "You're welcome, you're welcome." As he spoke, he walked over to the undead emperor. "Senior, I'm going to break through to the 20th phase." The undead emperor, in the following period of time, Yi Xian began to break through to the 20th phase. Even though he was only at the 10th phase, he could already enter the 6th layer of spacetime and fuse with it. What he needed now was some experience in the way of spacetime. And this undead emperor's guidance could make up for that. The undead emperor was actually quite shocked. This was because Yi Xian's cultivation speed was quite fast. This guy was only at the 10th phase, but he could already enter the 6th layer of spacetime and fuse with it. This was simply too abnormal. The undead emperor was becoming more and more curious about Yi Xian's origins. The reason why he had expressed goodwill to Yi Xian before was because he felt that Yi Xian was not a simple person. Perhaps this human could change his current predicament. Time passed bit by bit. Yi Xian's progress was godly, and he reached the 12th phase in less than a month. Not only that, but under the undead emperor's guidance, he became more and more familiar with the way of spacetime and understood it better. While Yi Xian was cultivating, Crimson Eye would sit by the blood sea every day without saying a word. Another month passed, and Yi Xian had reached the 13th phase. Even though he was only at the 13th phase, with his current strength, he could easily kill someone at the 17th phase even without using the profound green sword. It had to be said that cultivation consumed a lot of soul crystals. He had spent at least 1,000,000 soul crystals to reach the 13th phase. Fortunately, he had enough candied hawthorn. Otherwise, he would not have been able to cultivate so quickly. 1 month later, Yi Xian had reached the 14th phase. Just as he was about to continue cultivating, the blood sea in the distance suddenly began to boil. At the same time, an extremely terrifying pressure swept out from the depths of the blood sea. Chapter 1894. This sudden turn of events caused Yi Xian to frown. Just as he was about to ask the undead emperor what had happened, he was astonished to find that the undead emperor was lying flat on the ground, her bones trembling. Yi Xian's expression changed when he saw this. At this moment, the undead emperor suddenly said in a trembling voice, "Little fellow, kneel." Her voice was filled with terror. "Kneel?" Yi Xian shook his head. A person could die, but their backbone could not be broken. Actually, the main thing was that kneeling like this was too embarrassing. It was better to hold on for a while. Next to the sea of blood, Blood Eye slowly licked her candied haws with a calm expression. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before walking over to Blood Eye. Blood Eye turned to glance at Yi Xian before continuing to lick her candied haws. Yi Xian was about to speak when the sea of blood in the distance suddenly parted. Immediately afterwards, a bloodied person slowly walked over. When the undead emperor saw this bloody person, she buried her head in the ground and couldn't stop trembling. She was terrified to the extreme. Blood Eye looked at the bloodied person with a calm expression. At this moment, the bloodied person walked over to Blood Eye and bowed slightly. "Second miss, the patriarch has fallen." Blood Eye stopped licking her candied haws. She looked at the bloodied person and said, "Good." The bloodied person said in a low voice, "Second miss, before the patriarch fell, he said that you might become a threat to the family in the future. So, as soon as he died, he had to get rid of you." Hearing this, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. Damn it. Did this mean that the father was going to kill his daughter? At this moment, he suddenly felt that his father was not bad. There had to be a comparison. Blood Eye glanced at the bloodied person. "You?" As she spoke, she suddenly flipped her right hand. In an instant, a white light appeared above the blood-covered man's head. The blood-covered man was greatly shocked. Seamless Dao, you've always been hiding your strength, boom. Before the bloodied person could finish speaking, he was directly wiped out. Xue Tong took out a stick of Tunghulu and continued licking it. If I didn't hide my strength, would that old fart have let me live until now? Yi Xian could not help but glance at Xue Tong. He had always felt that he had taken advantage of Xue Tong. 2 candied haws for 100,000 soul crystals, that was a huge profit. But at this moment, he suddenly realized that this little girl was not stupid at all. While he was tricking others, he might also be tricked by others. Right at this moment, Xue Tong suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. I'll take you with me. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, where to? Xue Tong licked his candied fruit, and then he said, 9 Heavens City. Yi Xian frowned. Where? Blood, I said, my former home. Yi Xian's expression immediately changed. You want to kill your way back? Xue Tong looked at Yi Xian. My father is dead. Shouldn't I go back and have a look? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, you should go back and have a look, but it has nothing to do with me, right? Xue Tong frowned slightly. Aren't we friends? Yi Xian's expression froze. Xue Tong continued, since we're friends, then isn't my father your father as well? Of course, your father will be my father as well. I'm very fair. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Is that even possible? Xue Tong looked at Yi Xian. You don't treat me as a friend? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, of course we're friends. But why are you taking me with you? Xue Tong said, digging graves. Oh, no, I mean going back to observe mourning. Yi Xian broke out in cold sweat. This fellow wants to go back and dig graves. Damn it. She's leading me into a pit of fire. Xue Tong suddenly said, let's go. She turned around and left once she finished speaking. Yi Xian suddenly said, is it all right if I don't go? Xue Tong stopped and turned to look at Yi Xian. Can you contact your father now? Yi Xian was speechless. Xue Tong said, if you can't, then let's go. She turned around and walked towards the sea of blood. A threat. A blatant threat. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he turned to look at the undead emperor. Senior, do you want to go with me? The undead emperor hurriedly shook her head. No, no. Little brother, you go. Take care. Yi Xian was speechless. A moment later, Yi Xian and Xue Tong disappeared into the sea of blood. The undead emperor let out a heavy sigh of relief. She was finally free. In the distance, Yi Xian and Xue Tong walked on the sea of blood. Xue Tong walked very slowly as he licked his candied fruit. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Xue Tong, why are you taking me to that city of the 9 heavens? Xue Tong said, we're friends. You said that friends should share blessings and misfortunes together. Is there a problem? Yi Xian was speechless. Xue Tong said, don't be afraid. It's no big deal. Yi Xian was speechless. Of course you're not afraid. I'm so weak. I won't even know how I died if I went to dig up a grave with you. He wanted to run, but he knew that he couldn't escape at all. Xue Tong's strength wasn't something he could fight against right now. At this moment, the sky in the distance suddenly trembled. Yi Xian looked at the sky and saw that it had suddenly split open. Immediately, a figure floated out. It was a woman. The woman wore a long white dress and had a long tail. Her appearance was somewhat similar to Xue Tong's. Xue Tong glanced at the woman before continuing to lick his candied fruit. The woman in the white dress looked at Xue Tong. What are you doing? Xue Tong said, observing filial piety. The woman in the white dress stared at Xue Tong. He's already dead. This matter ends here, all right? Ends? Shui Tong grinned. It's just begun. As she spoke, she turned around and pointed at Yi Xian. Let me introduce a friend I just met. His name is Yi Xian. Yi Xian was speechless. Why are you introducing me? The woman in the white dress glanced at Yi Xian and said, such a weak friend? Yi Xian was speechless. Shui Tong licked his candied fruit. Is there anything else? The woman in the white dress looked at Shui Tong. Don't seek death. With that, she disappeared. Shui Tong continued forward. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, aren't you going to reconsider? Shui Tong took out a candied fruit and passed it to Yi Xian. Don't be afraid. At worst, I'll just die. Yi Xian was speechless. Not long after, Shui Tong brought Yi Xian to a stone step. At the end of the stone step was a huge stone door. The stone door was 300 m tall and extremely grand. Shui Tong said softly, we're here. Yi Xian glanced at the stone door. There were 4 large words in the center of the stone door, 9 Heavens City. Shui Tong suddenly walked up. At this moment, a man in black armor suddenly appeared not far away from Shui Tong. He was about to speak when Shui Tong suddenly pressed his right hand down. Boom! The man in black armor was directly obliterated. Instant kill. Shui Tong looked up and smiled. It's time to destroy the 9 Heavens clan. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly stomped her right foot. Boom! The stone gate collapsed with a loud rumble. At this moment, countless powerful auras suddenly appeared in the surroundings. At the same time, a woman in a white dress appeared not far away from Shui Tong. It was the woman in the white dress that Yi Xian had seen earlier. The woman in the white dress looked at Shui Tong. I gave you a chance. Shui Tong said disdainfully, gave me a chance. Big sister, who do you think you are? Are you even worthy of giving me a chance? As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly flipped her right hand. Boom! The expanse of space where the woman stood started to seethe. At the same time, an expanse of white light appeared above her. The expressions of the experts here changed drastically at the sight of this. Seamless Tao, the woman's expression changed drastically as well. The Seamless Tao. You've actually surpassed the Seamless Tao and attained the Seamless Tao. Shui Tong chuckled. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? As she spoke, she suddenly pressed down with her right hand. Boom! The white-robed woman's body instantly turned illusory. She was about to be sent into the seamless void. The white-robed woman was horrified. She opened her palm and a small golden bell appeared in her hand. In the next instant, the small golden bell transformed into a golden light that enveloped her. Under the envelopment of the golden light, the white-robed woman was protected. Shui Tong licked his candied fruit, and then he smiled. So it's the divine bell. Congratulations on becoming the patriarch of the 9 Heavens clan. The woman in the white dress stared fixedly at Shui Tong. What exactly do you want? Shui Tong smiled, to collect a debt. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly tapped forward with her finger. An array of blood-red light instantly smashed against the divine bell. Bang! The divine bell shattered, and then Shui Tong pressed down lightly with her right hand. A powerful force enveloped the woman in the white dress and was about to strike her into the Seamless Tao. However, a powerful aura suddenly appeared here. Bang! Crimson Eye retreated 10,000 feet away without a sound. Yi Xian gazed towards the distance and noticed that an old man had suddenly appeared behind the woman in the white dress. All the experts of the 9 Heavens clan bowed when they saw the old man, Patriarch. The Patriarch. Yi Xian's face fell when he heard this. So she's still alive. That little girl, Shui Tong, was tricked. The Patriarch of the 9 Heavens clan gazed at Shui Tong while a complicated expression flashed through his eyes. You've actually attained the Seamless Tao. Shuetong put the candied fruit away and said, "Old fellow, you're still alive." The patriarch of the Nine Heavens clan had a complicated expression on his face. "I'd intended to let you live, but unfortunately, you refused to change. Since it's like that, then I have no choice but to end you with my own two hands." As he spoke, he raised his right hand slowly and pressed it down lightly. In an instant, the expressions of the experts of the Nine Heavens clan changed drastically. Bloodline pressure. The patriarch of the Nine Heavens clan intends to crush Shuetong with his bloodline. Shuetong's figure suddenly started trembling violently. The powerful bloodline pressure was on the verge of crushing her, and she couldn't resist it at all. Because it came from her bloodline pressure, and she couldn't do anything unless she emptied her blood. But that was clearly impossible. Meanwhile, she suddenly appeared by Yi Xian's side, and she gazed at Yi Xian. "Are you a friend?" Yi Xian was about to speak when Shuetong suddenly said, "Lend me some blood." As she spoke, she patted Yi Xian lightly with her right hand. Boom! In an instant, blood spurted out of Yi Xian's mouth like a fountain, and under Shuetong's control, Yi Xian's blood began to boil. In an instant, an extremely terrifying bloodline pressure swept through the Nine Heavens realm. In an instant, the surrounding spacetime was shattered, and even the eighth layer of spacetime was annihilated at this moment. At the same time, the experts of the Nine Heavens clan felt their blood boil. Then, all the experts of the Nine Heavens clan knelt on the ground and trembled. Bloodline submission. This was the submission of one bloodline to another bloodline. Yi Xian was petrified at the sight of this. "Is my bloodline so terrifying?" His face darkened as if he had thought of something. Damn it. His bloodline has definitely been suppressed or sealed by his father. This bastard. Under the suppression of Yi Xian's bloodline power, the experts of the Nine Heavens tribe had no way of resisting. Of course, this was because Crimson Eye was strong enough to unleash the power of Yi Xian's bloodline. If Yi Xian used it himself, it definitely wouldn't be so terrifying. Meanwhile, Shuetong spoke abruptly. "You don't seem to know how formidable your bloodline is, right?" Yi Xian nodded. Shuetong glanced at Yi Xian. "Do you know how terrifying your bloodline power is?" Yi Xian shook his head. Shuetong smiled faintly and didn't say anything else. Yi Xian asked, "How terrifying is it?" Shuetong said softly, "When I activated your bloodline power just now, it wasn't even 10% of its true power. Less than 10%. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. Not even 10% was enough to suppress the bloodline of the Nine Heavens clan? Did I underestimate my father's strength a little? Shuetong said again, "Your father is very powerful." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Shuetong, the reason you didn't kill me was because of my bloodline power, right?" Shuetong nodded. "You're not an ordinary person. If I kill you, I'll be in big trouble." Yi Xian nodded. "So, you chose to be friends with me?" Shuetong glanced at Yi Xian. "Otherwise, do you really think I would be stupid enough to spend 100,000 soul crystals to buy 2 of your candied fruits?" Yi Xian was speechless. Shuetong suddenly stopped in her tracks. At this moment, she and Yi Xian were already in front of a large hall, and she looked at Yi Xian. "Do you know what this place is?" Yi Xian shook his head. Shuetong said, "This is the Nine Heavens clan's treasure vault, and there are many divine items inside." Hearing this, Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Let's go in and take a look." Even though he said that, he didn't go in. Instead, he waited for Shuetong to go in first. Seeing that Yi Xian didn't go in first, Shuetong licked the candied fruits and said, "You're very smart." As she spoke, she walked towards the hall. As soon as she stepped in, a white light suddenly surged over. Shuetong flicked her sleeve. Boom! The white light was instantly obliterated. Shuetong looked at Yi Xian. "If you had charged in just now, even if you didn't die, your body would have been destroyed." As she spoke, she walked in. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he followed her in. As soon as he entered the hall, Yi Xian was stunned. The entire hall was filled with all sorts of divine items, and it was obvious that they weren't ordinary at a glance. Meanwhile, Shui Tong suddenly said, "Every single divine item here is worth at least 1,000,000 soul crystals. There are at least 1,000 of them here, and all of them belong to the Nine Heavens clan. Now, I'll give them all to you." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "You're giving them all to me?" Shui Tong licked the candied fruits. "Yes." Yi Xian glanced at Shui Tong. "Why?" Shui Tong blinked. "We're friends." Yi Xian shook his head, "As if I'd believe you." Shui Tong smiled. "Do you want them or not?" Yi Xian immediately said, "Of course." As he spoke, he put away the divine items. Actually, he wasn't too tempted. This was because he had a super divine item in his body, the Qingxian sword. Of course, these divine items would be of great help to him now. Shui Tong continued to walk inside, and soon, she arrived in front of a stone door. The stone door trembled violently, and then a golden seal suddenly flew out from the stone door. Shui Tong punched out. Boom! The stone door was smashed into pieces. Yi Xian looked at the stone door curiously. There must be some kind of treasure inside. However, when he saw the scene inside the stone door, he was stunned. There was no treasure behind the stone door. There was only a woman inside. Her 4 limbs were tightly bound by chains. Not only that, she was no longer breathing. At this moment, Shui Tong walked in front of the woman and looked at her without saying a word. Yi Xian glanced at Shui Tong, then slowly retreated from the stone door. After a while, Shui Tong walked out of the stone door. She walked to Yi Xian's side and said softly, "The one inside is my mother. She was imprisoned when I was 6 years old until she died." Yi Xian asked in a low voice, "Why?" Shui Tong said, "My mother didn't like my father. She liked someone else. Although she married my father, she didn't have my father in her heart." Yi Xian asked, "So, your father imprisoned her?" Shui Tong nodded, "Yes." At this point, she looked at Yi Xian. "Men are all bad, don't you think so?" Yi Xian nodded, "Except me." Shui Tong looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian blinked. "You don't think I'm good?" Shui Tong licked the candied fruit and asked, "How many women do you have?" Yi Xian said nothing. Shui Tong raised 2 fingers, "More than 2. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then said, "I'm actually a very loyal man, but because I'm too outstanding, many women can't help but fall in love with me. I'm actually very troubled." Sigh. Shui Tong looked at Yi Xian without saying a word, and just looked at him. Yi Xian felt a little uncomfortable being looked at. "Shui Tong, what do you plan to do next?" Shui Tong said, "I want to go somewhere. Do you want to come with me?" Yi Xian immediately shook his head. No, I have other things to do." He didn't want to go with this little girl. He just wanted to find a place to cultivate, reach the 20th phase, and then find a way to unseal the green profound sword. Shui Tong suddenly said, "I can guide you." Yi Xian glanced at Shui Tong. "Do you have any conditions?" Shui Tong nodded. "Come with me." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What for?" Shui Tong said, "To play." Yi Xian didn't say anything. Shui Tong licked his sugar-coated haw, and then said, "If I guide you, you can reach the 20th phase in less than half a year, and reach the Seamless Realm in 3 years. Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Shui Tong, are the Seamless Realm and the Seamless Path different?" Shui Tong nodded. "They're worlds apart." Yi Xian asked, "What's the difference?" Shui Tong thought for a moment, and then said, "The undead are the Seamless Realm, and I am the Seamless Path. Do you understand?" Yi Xian fell silent. The undead emperors were the Seamless Realm, and Shui Tong was the Seamless Path. A single look from Shui Tong could make an undead emperor kneel and tremble in fear. Shui Tong said, "Not only that, I can also help you completely awaken your bloodline. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Miss Shuetong, can you tell me where you're going? Why are you bringing me along? Shuetong blinked. You'll know when we get there. Yi Xian didn't say anything. Shuetong continued, are you going or not? If you don't, I won't force you. Yi Xian still didn't say anything. Shuetong continued, if you cultivate normally, you'll need at least a few hundred years to reach the 20th phase. Not only that, but you'll also need a large number of soul crystals before long. But if you follow me, not only will you receive my guidance, but you won't have to worry about cultivation resources. She glanced at Yi Xian as she spoke. Having someone to guide you is completely different from not having anyone to guide you. Do you understand? Yi Xian suddenly said, Miss Shuetong, I'll follow you from now on. Shuetong nodded, let's go. With that, she turned to leave, but stopped after taking a few steps. You have to do me a favor first. Yi Xian asked, what favor? At this time, a voice suddenly sounded from behind him. She probably wants you to help her deal with me. Yi Xian turned around, and an old man had appeared not far away. The old man sized up Yi Xian. Is it your bloodline that suppressed my 9 Heavens clan's bloodline? Yi Xian said in a low voice, you are? The old man said, an ancestor of the 9 Heavens clan. Yi Xian was speechless. Shuetong walked over to Yi Xian, glanced at the old man, and then said, descend with your main body. Yi Xian said in a low voice, can you defeat him? Shuetong thought for a moment, and then said, even if I can't defeat him, I can still escape. What are you going to do? Yi Xian looked at Shuetong with a shocked expression. You're not going to take me with you? Shuetong blinked. I can take you with me, but you have to give me some benefits. Yi Xian. Chapter 1896. Benefits. Yi Xian's expression was quite unsightly because she was actually trying to extort him. Right at this moment, the old man suddenly smiled. Don't panic. She needs your help. Yi Xian gazed at the old man, and the old man smiled. Her cultivation is the same as mine, but her bloodline is restrained by me. So, she'll suffer a loss if she doesn't have your help. Yi Xian gazed at Shuetong. Shuetong licked his candied fruit and remained silent. The old man suddenly said, young brother, can you take a look at your bloodline? Yi Xian nodded. He opened his palm, and a drop of blood essence floated out slowly. The old man's expression instantly became solemn when he laid eyes on it. Shuetong glanced at the old man and remained silent. A short while later, the old man spoke in a low voice. May I know who your ancestor is? Yi Xian smiled. Senior, you definitely don't know him. The old man nodded slightly, and then he glanced at Shuetong and said, young brother, you have to be careful. Yi Xian smiled. Are you worried about Miss Shuetong? The old man said, it isn't just her. There are many unknown enemies as well. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Unknown enemies? Senior, I've just arrived here and haven't made any enemies, so how could there be unknown enemies? The old man gazed at Yi Xian. There are some mysterious and formidable special powers in the boundless universe. The methods of cultivation of these powers are unlike ordinary people. They mainly cultivate their bloodlines, and they frequently devour bloodlines. Young brother, your bloodline is so special, so you're exactly their target. Yi Xian's face fell. Since my bloodline is so terrifying, why would they dare to look for trouble with me? The old man smiled. Do they know that your ancestor is still alive? Yi Xian fell silent. Indeed. No one else knows that my father is still alive. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian gazed at Shuetong. You didn't kill me because you knew my father was still alive. Shuetong was just about to speak when the old man smiled. Of course. Otherwise, she would have devoured your bloodline a long time ago. If she devoured your bloodline, her strength would increase by at least 10 times. Yi Xian sighed in a low voice. Shuetong, I treat you as a friend. Blood. I licked the candied haws, 2 candied haws for 100,000 soul crystals. You're such a good friend. Yi Xian was speechless. Crimson. I looked at the elder in the distance. He's trying to sow discord between us. Also, he wants to devour your bloodline. However, he's very smart. Firstly, with me here, he knows he can't do it. Secondly, he's also afraid of the person behind you. I can sense the desire in his eyes. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. He wants to devour you too. Yi Xian smiled and said, I finally understand. All of you want to devour my bloodline. The old man smiled and said, You've misunderstood. As soon as he finished speaking, he glanced at Xue Tong before turning around and leaving. Yi Xian looked at the old man in the distance and did not say anything. Xue Tong licked the candied haws and said, It won't be long before news of your special bloodline will spread throughout the universe. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? Xue Tong looked at Yi Xian. What do you think he's here for? To avenge the Nine Heavens clan? No, his true goal is you. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Just because of my bloodline? Xue Tong nodded. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian asked, Can I devour other people's bloodlines? Hearing this, Xue Tong frowned slightly. After a moment, she looked at Yi Xian and asked, Can't I? The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. If others could devour him, then he could also devour others. Who was afraid of bloodlines? At this moment, Xue Tong suddenly said, Let's go. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. Yi Xian followed. On the way, Yi Xian was a little curious. Miss Xue Tong, after the 20th stage is the Seamless Realm, and after the Seamless Realm is the Seamless Tao? Xue Tong nodded. Yi Xian said in a low voice, There is only a difference of 1 stage between the Seamless Tao, but the difference in power is so great. Xue Tong said, The difference between the two is like heaven and earth. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian asked, What about above the Seamless Tao? Xue Tong was silent for a moment. Deities. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Deities? Xue Tong nodded. An existence that surpasses the Tao of spacetime. However, it is only a legend. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Then, he asked, Miss Xue Tong, what universe is this? Xue Tong glanced at Yi Xian. The Seamless Universe, a level 7 civilization. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Have you seen a level 8 civilization before? Xue Tong said, I have. Yi Xian was stunned. Then, he said in shock, You have? Xue Tong nodded. You will see it soon. Yi Xian didn't understand. Just as he was about to ask, Xue Tong suddenly said, Please be quiet. Yi Xian was speechless. After a moment, Xue Tong suddenly said, Someone is following us. Yi Xian looked around. He didn't find anything. Xue Tong opened his palm and pressed it down. Boom! Thousands of meters away, the space there suddenly exploded apart, and then an old man retreated explosively. He retreated for an entire 30 kilometers before he finally stopped. Xue Tong looked at the old man. Ling clan. The old man said in a low voice, Sir, we have no intention of becoming enemies with you. Xue Tong nodded. I know. Your Ling clan's target is the little guy beside me. The old man stared at Xue Tong without saying anything. Xue Tong turned to look at Yi Xian. Look, the matter of your bloodline has already spread. Yi Xian smiled. It was your ancestor who did it. He wanted to use others to test me, right? Xue Tong nodded. How smart. Yi Xian was about to speak when the old man suddenly disappeared. Xue Tong said, The Ling clan is comparable in strength to the Nine Heavens clan. It is also a special clan with a very powerful bloodline. Of course, the Ling clan isn't scary. The ones you really need to be careful of are the Jiashan clan. This clan's bloodline is extremely powerful, and they like to devour bloodlines. If I'm not wrong, they should be investigating you by now. Yi Xian looked at Shuetong. Why didn't you devour my bloodline? Shuetong glanced at Yi Xian. First, I didn't rely on my bloodline. Second, when I entered your Shao Ta, I discovered some secrets. However, others don't know these secrets, understand? Yi Xian was speechless. Shuetong said, don't think too much about it for now. I can protect you for a period of time. Let's go. 2 hours later, Shuetong brought Yi Xian to a star field. There were many buildings floating in this star field, and it was very messy. Yi Xian looked around. This is? Shuetong pointed at the ruins in the distance. A former level 8 civilization. Yi Xian looked at the ruins in the distance. Among the ruins, a dilapidated hall could be vaguely seen. Other than that, there were dozens of stone pillars that were tens of thousands of meters tall standing around it. Although these stone pillars were tens of thousands of meters tall, they seemed rather small in the endless starry sky. Shuetong suddenly said, do you see that hall? No one has been able to approach it until now. Yi Xian looked at Shuetong. You don't want me to go, do you? Shuetong nodded. Yi Xian's face darkened. What makes you think I can go in? Shuetong thought for a moment and said, let's give it a try. Yi Xian was speechless. Shuetong said, let's go. As she spoke, she started walking towards the distance. Yi Xian glanced at Shuetong before following her. When they were 3 kilometers away from the hall, a shadow suddenly walked out from within it. The shadow walked slowly towards Yi Xian and Shuetong while holding a sword in its hand. The shadow looked at Shuetong and Yi Xian. Stop. Shuetong glanced at the shadow, and then he looked at Yi Xian. You go talk to him. Yi Xian's face darkened. Why should I go talk to him? Shuetong said, I can't. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. Do you think I can? Shuetong licked his candied fruit and said, you can give it a try. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, you can't defeat him? Shuetong shook his head. I can't. Yi Xian gazed at the shadow. Meanwhile, the shadow said, leave. Shuetong gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian gazed at the shadow and was about to speak. However, the shadow suddenly swung its sword. Bang! Yi Xian didn't even have time to react before Shuetong was slashed over 30 kilometers away. After that, the shadow gazed at Yi Xian. The shadow gazed at Yi Xian for a short while before it said, please. As he spoke, he moved to the side and made a gesture of invitation. Yi Xian fell silent. Could I really be the legendary child of destiny? If that's true, then doesn't it mean that I can really beat my dad up in the future? The shadow continued, please. Yi Xian glanced at the shadow, and then he walked towards the hall in the distance. On the other side, Shuetong wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and continued to lick the candied fruit. No one knew what he was thinking. At this time, the ancestor of the Nine Heavens clan appeared not far from Shuetong. In addition, there was a middle-aged man with 3 tails. This person was the patriarch of the Na Shan clan, Naga Qing. Shuetong glanced at Naga Qing but didn't speak. Naga Qing smiled. So Miss Shuetong didn't devour that little guy's bloodline because you wanted him to enter the Divine Spirit Palace. Shuetong continued to lick the candied fruit and didn't speak. Naga Qing looked at the Divine Spirit Palace in the distance. After a while, he looked at the shadow guarding there and said softly, Miss Shuetong, can you tell me why he can enter the Divine Spirit Palace? The patriarch of the Nine Heavens clan also looked at Shuetong. This was also what he was most curious about. After a moment of silence, Shuetong said, if you devour his bloodline, your strength will increase by at least 10 times. You can even break through the seamless Tao and reach the Divine Spirit realm. Naga Qing looked at Shuetong and said with a smile, "This person is not simple. If we touch him, we might bring disaster upon ourselves." Shuetong said, "Will you give up?" After a moment of silence, Naga Qing said, "Is there anyone behind him?" Shuetong shook his head. "No." Naga Qing stared at Shuetong. "Are you sure?" Shuetong glanced at Shuetong. "It's up to you whether you want to touch him or not." After a moment of silence, Naga Qing said with a smile, "Miss Shuetong, why don't you touch him?" "Let me guess. You must have discovered something. Otherwise, that young man wouldn't have survived until now." As he said this, he looked at the Divine Spirit Palace in the distance. That young man can enter the Divine Spirit Palace. This means that his identity is definitely not ordinary. As Miss Shuetong said, "If I devour his bloodline, I might reach the Divine Spirit realm, but I might also be doomed." After saying this, he smiled slightly. It's better not to touch this kind of second generation. This kind of young man usually has an old man behind him, or even a group of old men. We can't afford to offend him. P.S. I've just returned home recently. There are too many things to do, so I can't update properly. I go home once a year. When I get home, people ask me what I do, how much money I make. I'm a little embarrassed. I make 4,000 or 5,000 a month, but I'm embarrassed to say. Sigh, I'll work harder next year and try to buy a 4-wheeled one. Chapter 1897. Shuetong glanced at Naga Qing and did not speak. The Nine Heavens clan leader smiled. Clan leader Qing is still so cautious. Naga Qing smiled. The lives of tens of thousands of clansmen depend on me. I have to be careful. He looked at the Divine Spirit Palace in the distance. This young man is not simple to be invited by the Divine Spirit Palace. The Nine Heavens clan leader was silent. The reason why he informed Naga Qing was to let Nashin clan test Yi Xian's strength. Unfortunately, Nashin clan did not fall for it. What a pity. The Nine Heavens clan leader sighed. Naga Qing glanced at the Nine Heavens clan leader and sneered. Shuetong licked his candied fruit and did not speak. No one knew what he was thinking. In the distance, Yi Xian came to the front of the palace. He looked up at the top of the palace. There were 3 words, Divine Spirit Palace. Divine Spirit Palace? Yi Xian frowned. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from inside the palace. "Come in." After a moment of silence, Yi Xian walked into the palace. There was a woman sitting cross-legged in the palace. The woman wore a white dress and had shoulder-length hair. Her facial features were exquisite. Beautiful. This was Yi Xian's first impression. In front of the woman, there was a chessboard. The woman looked at Yi Xian. "Fellow Taoist, please sit." "Fellow Taoist?" Yi Xian's expression was a little strange. This woman called him fellow Taoist? Whatever. A fellow Taoist is a fellow Taoist. Yi Xian sat in front of the woman. The woman looked at Yi Xian. "Please." Obviously, she wanted Yi Xian to play chess. Yi Xian thought for a while. Then he picked up a chess piece and put it down. The woman put down a chess piece. "Fellow Taoist, you have 9 stages in your life chart. It's really rare." Yi Xian frowned. "Life chart? 9 stages?" The woman smiled. "You don't know?" Yi Xian shook his head. The woman smiled faintly. After the Divine Spirit realm is the Fate realm, which is also the realm of life cultivation. Life cultivation is divided into 10 stages. The higher the rank, the harder the fate, and the stronger the strength. Yi Xian said in a low voice, "I'm only 15 stages. He hasn't even reached the fate realm yet." The woman smiled and said, "There are 2 kinds of fate. The first is cultivated, and the second is innate fate. Some people are born with a hard fate, and you should belong to the latter." Yi Xian asked, "What's the use?" The woman raised a chess piece and placed it down. "How did you manage to survive until now?" "It's because my life is tough." Yi Xian was silent. The woman suddenly said, "Please excuse me." As she spoke, she gently moved her jade-like finger. In an instant, the blood in Yi Xian's body began to boil. Bloodline power activated. The woman's expression gradually became solemn when she saw Yi Xian's bloodline power. A moment later, she withdrew her hand and said, "I've never seen such a bloodline before." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian and said, "No wonder your fate is so tough." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He knew that the reason why his fate was tough was because of his father and Qing. Was he really a second-generation heir? The woman said again, "You have to be careful." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Why do you say that?" The woman said, "Firstly, your bloodline is extremely special. After some powerful people devour your bloodline, they will obtain great benefits. This benefit is enough to change their fate. Secondly, your birth providence is a connate birth providence. In other words, your birth providence can be taken and transferred to someone else." Yi Xian frowned. "This chapter is not finished. Please continue." He frowned. "Fate can be transferred?" The woman nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "According to Senior, my fate is 9 stages. Isn't that very tough? Since it's so tough, how can it be taken away?" The woman said, "Your fate is tough, but your strength is very weak." Yi Xian, the woman said again, "Moreover, some people's fate may be tougher than yours. There are also strong and weak people with 9 stages. Apart from that, there are many powerhouses with 9 stages, and there are 10 above 9 stages." Yi Xian was silent. His entire body was a treasure. The woman said again, "Of course, your bloodline is so special and your fate is so tough. Ordinary people don't dare to touch you. However, those who dare to touch you are either super powerhouses or super forces." Xiao Ta suddenly said, "Young master, I think your fate is more than 9 stages." Yi Xian laughed in his heart. "Why?" Xiao Ta said, "Your fate is linked to Sister Tianming. How can it be a mere 9 stages?" "Yi Xian," Xiao Ta said, "My fate is definitely more than 9 stages. Because I am linked to Young Master, being with Young Master is equivalent to being with Sister Tianming. So, I am invincible." "Yi Xian," Xiao Ta suddenly said, "Xiao Ta, I want to change my name." Yi Xian frowned, "Change your name? What name?" Xiao Ta said, "Destiny's Tower." Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Destiny's Tower? This Xiao Ta was preparing to hug Qing's thigh to the end. Xiao Ta said excitedly, "Yes, I will be called Destiny's Tower from now on." Yi Xian, at this time, the woman in front of Yi Xian suddenly said, "Mister, I have a favor to ask." Yi Xian looked at the woman. "What is it?" The woman opened her palm, and a storage ring appeared in her hand. "This is called the God Ring. It is the token of our divine sect leader. Seeing this ring is like seeing the sect leader." Saying that, she put the God Ring in front of Yi Xian. "Help me bring it to divine sect." Yi Xian was silent. The woman smiled slightly. "Of course, I won't ask for your help for free. There are benefits." Yi Xian asked subconsciously, "What benefits?" The woman smiled. "Do you remember the sword wielder you saw before you came in?" Yi Xian nodded. The woman looked at Yi Xian. "He is my sword slave, and his strength is at the divine spirit realm. If you are willing to help, he will listen to your commands in the future. Not only that, there are also 3 sword slaves in this storage ring, and they are all at the divine spirit realm. In addition, I will also give you an inheritance that will allow you to easily reach the seamless path." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Senior, there is something I don't understand. That is, why don't you bring it to divine sect yourself? Why do you want me to do it?" The woman smiled. I have already fallen. If I leave this place, I will immediately die. Yi Xian hesitated, then asked, as far as I know, Senior is from a level 8 civilization? The woman nodded, yes. Yi Xian continued to ask, then why did Senior die? The woman didn't speak. Yi Xian just looked at the woman, not saying anything. Great benefits often meant great danger at the same time. At this time, the woman smiled, can I not say? Yi Xian nodded, yes. But Senior, I might not be able to help you. After all, my strength is low, and if I help Senior, I might be overestimating myself. After a moment of silence, the woman said, he was killed. Killed. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth twitched, damn, you were killed even though you were so strong, and you want me to help you? I can't do this. At this time, the woman said, don't worry, he has also fallen. Yi Xian blinked his eyes, die together? The woman nodded, die together. So, you can rest assured. Yi Xian didn't speak. The woman said, you need to become stronger, right? Yi Xian nodded. The woman smiled, it's just a ring. As long as you don't cause trouble, nothing will happen. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian stood up and smiled, okay. The woman pointed at the ring, where this ring? This ring has the route to divine sect. Apart from that, you will also receive an inheritance. Not only that, there are billions of soul crystals for you to use. Yi Xian looked at the woman, Senior won't trick me, right? The woman smiled, I will. Yi Xian laughed, thank you for your honesty, Senior. With that, he turned and left. After Yi Xian disappeared in the distance, the woman slowly closed her eyes. At the same time, her body gradually became illusory. After a while, a mosquito-like voice suddenly rang out, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Not long after Yi Xian left the Sacred Spirit Palace, the Sacred Spirit Palace behind him disappeared bit by bit. He knew that the woman was completely gone. Yi Xian looked at the ring on his finger. The 4 sword slaves were in the ring. Apart from that, there were billions of soul crystals in the ring. It could be said that he didn't need to worry about cultivation resources anymore. Most importantly, there was an inheritance in the ring. At this time, Shuetong and the other 2 suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Shuetong looked at Yi Xian, you're out? Yi Xian smiled, yes. Naga Qing suddenly said, young Master Yi, I am Naga Qing, the patriarch of Nashan clan. Yi Xian looked at Naga Qing and smiled, Senior, don't tell me you want to devour my bloodline? Naga Qing laughed, young Master Yi, you really know how to joke. Yi Xian blinked, you really don't want to devour? Naga Qing shook his head, young Master Yi, don't joke. Yi Xian smiled and looked at Shuetong, I'm leaving. Shuetong continued to lick the candied fruit, not saying a word. Yi Xian said, if you want to devour my bloodline, this is your last chance. Shuetong looked at Yi Xian, not saying a word. Yi Xian said with a smile, last chance. Shuetong was silent. Yi Xian laughed and turned to leave. The moment Yi Xian turned around, the smiles on the faces of the 9 Heavens clan leader and Naga Qing gradually disappeared. At this time, Naga Qing suddenly shook his head, I can't afford to offend you. After saying that, he turned around and left. At this moment, he really gave up. Shuetong also turned around and left. At this time, the 9 Heavens clan leader suddenly laughed, the 2 of you, please wait. Naga Qing and Shuetong stopped and looked at the 9 Heavens clan leader. The 9 Heavens clan leader looked at Yi Xian in the distance and said with a smile, young Master Yi, please wait. Yi Xian turned to look at the 9 Heavens clan leader and said with a smile, all right. The 9 Heavens clan leader looked at Yi Xian, I know that the person behind young Master Yi is not simple, but young Master Yi's bloodline is too special. Moreover, young Master Yi obtained something from the Divine Spirit Palace, so my friend and I want to make a bet. Come out and meet young Master Yi. As soon as he finished speaking, terrifying auras suddenly appeared. End of this chapter. Chapter 1898. Along with the appearance of those terrifying auras, 16 super experts appeared. Among them, there were 3 seamless Dao experts, and the rest were all seamless realm experts. Naga Qing looked at the old man in the lead and frowned. Ancient clan. Ancient clan. This was also a super force, and its strength was no weaker than the Na Celestial clan. Shui Tong glanced at the Nine Heavens clan patriarch and continued to lick her candied fruit. The Nine Heavens clan patriarch looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Young Master Yi, the temptation of your bloodline is too great. Old man, you've lived for so many years, and you've lived long enough. If you can't break through and reach the divine spirit realm, there's no point in continuing to live. So, I want to give it a try. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. The Nine Heavens clan patriarch laughed, and then looked at Naga Qing. Patriarch Qing, your Na Celestial clan's bloodline has reached a bottleneck, and breaking through is as difficult as ascending to the heavens. This human before you is an opportunity for your Na Celestial clan. So long as you devour his bloodline, your Na Celestial clan will definitely rise to a higher level and achieve glory. Naga Qing glanced at Yi Xian, and then he smiled. No. Nine Heavens clan patriarch, I, Naga Qing, have no ambition. I just want to lead my clan and live well. Please. The Nine Heavens clan patriarch smiled. I won't force you. As he spoke, he looked at Shui Tong. What about you? Shui Tong didn't speak. The Nine Heavens clan patriarch wanted to say something, but the ancient clan patriarch suddenly smiled. Say no more. The two of them want this human's bloodline and the divine items in the divine spirit palace, but they are afraid of wolves in front and tigers behind. Why should we cooperate with them? As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, you have no enmity with the ancient clan, but the power of your bloodline is too tempting, so I'm sorry for offending you. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared on the spot. At the same time, the experts beside him also rushed out. Yi Xian stood on the spot, and when the ancient clan patriarch arrived in front of Yi Xian, a sword ray suddenly appeared. Boom! Before anyone could react, the Gu clan patriarch was sent flying hundreds of thousands of feet away, and as soon as he stopped, his body instantly shattered. As for the ancient race experts that had rushed towards Yi Xian, other than 2 seamless experts, the rest were all killed. Everyone was dumbfounded. Naga Qing took a deep look at the sword slave in front of Yi Xian, and his eyes flashed with fear and shock. He never thought that the guard of the Divine Spirit Temple would actually follow Yi Xian. How did this guy do it? Blood Eye glanced at Yi Xian but didn't say anything. On the other side, the patriarch of the Nine Heavens clan had an extremely ugly expression on his face. Why are the guards of the Divine Spirit Palace following Yi Xian? In the distance, the ancient race leader looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. Why is the Sacred Spirit Palace guard following you? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, personal charm. The ancient race leader raged, bullshit. At this moment, the sword slave suddenly disappeared on the spot. Hiss. Before the Gu clan's patriarch could react, a sword had pierced through his forehead. Although the gap between the seamless Tao and the half-step divine spirit realm wasn't as huge as the divine spirit realm, it was still like heaven and earth. When they saw this, the remaining 2 seamless Tao experts turned around and ran, but they were just about to run when 2 rays of sword light slashed their bodies. Boom! 2 powerhouses of the seamless Tao were directly killed. They didn't even have the strength to fight back. Looking at this scene, Yi Xian could not help but look at Shui Tong, who was at the side. Back then, Shui Tong had taken a blow from the sword slave head-on. However, Shui Tong did not die, and his physical body did not even shatter. It seemed that although Blood Eye was, this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. although he was also a seamless Dao expert, his strength was much stronger. No. This guy was hiding his strength. Yi Xian couldn't help but look at Blood Eye, and Blood Eye grinned. At this moment, the Nine Heavens clan's patriarch suddenly said, "Young friend, I am willing to follow you and serve you." Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, "Are you worthy?" As soon as he finished speaking, the sword slave disappeared on the spot. Hiss. A sword pierced through the Nine Heavens clan's patriarch's forehead. Just as the sword slave was about to destroy the Nine Heavens clan's patriarch, Blood Eye suddenly said, "You can devour his bloodline." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then appeared in front of the Nine Heavens clan's patriarch and slapped his shoulder. Bang! The Nine Heavens clan's patriarch's body shattered, and blood gushed out. Yi Xian opened his right hand, and the blood flowed into his palm. Soon, he absorbed all the blood. A moment later, Yi Xian frowned and looked at Blood Eye. There's no reaction. Blood Eye glanced at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian was puzzled and wanted to ask more questions. At this moment, Naga Qing suddenly smiled and said, "Young Master Yi, the reason you didn't react is because his bloodline is too weak." "No, it's because your bloodline is too strong. His bloodline has no effect on yours." "Too strong." Yi Xian smiled and said, "You too, I have to take my leave." Blood Eye suddenly said, "What did you get?" Naga Qing looked at Yi Xian. He was also curious about what Yi Xian had encountered in the Divine Spirit Palace. Yi Xian blinked. "I'm not telling you." After saying that, he turned and left. Blood Eye suddenly said, "I'll go with you." Yi Xian turned and looked at Blood Eye. "Go with me?" Blood Eye nodded. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, "All right." He decided to take Blood Eye with him because he needed his help now. Although he had the inheritance of Divine Sect, his realm was too low. If there was someone to guide him, he could improve even faster. At this moment, Naga Qing suddenly said, "Young Master Yi, if you have time in the future, please come to the Na Shan clan as a guest." Yi Xian smiled. "All right." Naga Qing cupped his fists. "See you later." Yi Xian nodded, then turned and left with Blood Eye. After Yi Xian and Blood Eye left, Naga Qing heaved a sigh of relief. In fact, he had thought of killing Yi Xian just now. However, after seeing how calm Yi Xian was, that thought disappeared without a trace. What did it mean to be so calm in front of so many powerhouses? It meant that he had nothing to fear. And his guess was correct. After a moment, the corner of Naga Qing's mouth raised slightly. Ancient clan. Nine Heavens clan. Now this divine universe belongs to the Na Shan clan. After saying that, he turned and left. To some extent, the Na Shan clan was the biggest winner. On the other side, in the starry sky, Yi Xian was flying on his sword with Blood Eye by his side. About half an hour later, Yi Xian looked around. This place was a dead star field, very quiet, suitable for cultivation. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and looked at the storage ring on his finger. The next moment, a white light entered his brow. Boom! In an instant, countless information poured into his mind. Inheritance. Divine Sect inheritance. On the side, Blood Eye glanced at Yi Xian, then turned to look at the end of the starry sky. No one knew what he was thinking. After a long time, Yi Xian's body suddenly surged out. This chapter is not finished, please continue. A powerful aura appeared, causing the surrounding starry sky to tremble. Blood Eye looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly took out countless soul crystals and began to absorb them like crazy. About 10 days later, Yi Xian's aura suddenly soared. Boom! As the starry sky around him fluctuated, Yi Xian reached the 16th phase. Yi Xian was about to rush to the next phase when Blood Eye suddenly said, "If you continue like this, your realm will be unstable and there will be many hidden dangers." Yi Xian looked at Blood Eye. Then what should I do? Blood Eye said, whether your realm is stable or not depends on your use of the Tao of spacetime. You have reached the 16th phase, but your mastery of the Tao of spacetime is still on the low side. You should familiarize yourself with each layer of spacetime and master them. Yi Xian said solemnly, please advise me, Miss Blood Eye. Blood Eye nodded. She opened her palm and lightly swept it. In an instant, she and Yi Xian directly entered the 7th layer of spacetime. Blood Eye said, you can perfectly fuse with the 6th layer of spacetime. There is no need to familiarize yourself with the 6th layer of spacetime and below. We will start from the 7th layer of spacetime. Now feel the spacetime pressure around you. Yi Xian looked around with an incomparably solemn expression. He didn't dare to move at all. If not for Blood Eye, he might have been crushed as soon as he entered the 7th layer of spacetime. The spacetime pressure of the 7th layer of spacetime was at least 100 times stronger than the 6th layer. Blood Eye looked at Yi Xian. It's very simple. Fuse with the 7th layer of spacetime, then overlap the 1st to 7th layers of spacetime and use it in your sword skills. This way, the power of your sword skills will increase countless times. Yi Xian frowned slightly. 1st to 7th layers of spacetime? Blood Eye nodded. Yi Xian said solemnly, I can only overlap the 1st to 5th layers of spacetime. Blood Eye said, if you can't overlap multiple spacetime, even if you reach the 20th layer, you are still an ant. Yi Xian looked at Blood Eye. The Gu clan patriarch is also a seamless path cultivator, and so are you. However, the gap between you and him is very big. Is this the reason? Blood Eye nodded. Yi Xian fell silent. The reason he could fuse with the 6th layer of spacetime was because of the green profound sword. But now, he didn't have the green profound sword. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's expression changed greatly. He suddenly realized that he was actually relying on the green profound sword to such an extent. Without the green profound sword, what should he do? Thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly broke out in cold sweat. He finally knew why his father had sealed the green profound sword. If he did not seal the Qingxian sword, he would never be able to leave the Qingxian sword. And that was the strength of the Qingxian sword, not his own strength. Thinking of this, Yi Xian felt a lingering fear. Fortunately, his father had sealed the green profound sword. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would be enslaved by the sword in the future. Having a strong sword and a weak person was not a good thing. Beside him, Blood Eye suddenly said, you have to try to fuse with the 7th layer of spacetime and then grasp it. As for the realm, it's actually not particularly important. The so-called realm is just a kind of restraint. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. Saying that, he slowly closed his eyes and began to feel the 7th layer of spacetime. Without the Qingxian sword, would he be unable to cultivate normally? He didn't believe it. When this thought arose, a powerful sword intent suddenly appeared on Yi Xian's body. Ever since he obtained the green profound sword, his swordsmanship had not improved for a long time. Now, he had finally folded the 7th layer of spacetime. Meanwhile, Xuetong suddenly said, spatial folding? Yi Xian looked at Xuetong and nodded. Yes. Xuetong nodded but didn't say anything. Yi Xian smiled and said, do you have any suggestions? Xuetong said, you've only folded spacetime. Do you know that spacetime can be folded again after being folded? Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. Time and space are folded again and again? Xuetong nodded. Yi Xian said in a low voice, is that possible? Xuetong glanced at Yi Xian, what do you think? Yi Xian fell silent. Time and space are folded again and again. Xuetong said, do you know why that guard sword was so fast? Yi Xian said, time and space are folded? Xuetong nodded. He's folded the 8th layer at least 4 times, and that's why his sword was able to instantly kill a seamless Dao expert. Because after time and space are folded 4 times, his speed isn't something that the seamless Dao can resist. Yi Xian said in a low voice, "How many times can time and space be folded?" Xue Tong looked at Yi Xian, theoretically speaking, countless times. However, the difficulty increases by a few dozen times with every fold. Moreover, the further it goes, the more difficult it becomes. When she spoke up to this point, she licked her candied fruit and said, "The space-time Dao? This chapter isn't finished. Please continue. It's not as simple as you think." Yi Xian nodded, "I've learned something new." Xue Tong said, "If you can fold time and space a second time, then with your current strength, killing a stage 20 expert is a piece of cake. Even a seamless realm expert isn't impossible." Yi Xian asked, "What if I can fold time and space 3 times?" Xue Tong said indifferently, "I can easily kill a seamless Dao expert." Yi Xian asked again, "What if I can fold time and space 4 times?" Xue Tong looked at Yi Xian, "I can easily kill a seamless Dao expert. Just like that guard in the Divine Spirit Palace." Yi Xian nodded, "I understand." Xue Tong continued, "Folding time and space can't completely measure a person's strength. Besides folding time and space, there's also space-time distortion, space-time pressure, space-time overlap, space-time detonation, space-time black hole, space-time jump, etc. In short, the space-time Dao is boundlessly profound and mysterious." Yi Xian looked at Xue Tong, "What are you good at?" Xue Tong said indifferently, "A bit of everything." Yi Xian asked, "Are you good at it?" Xue Tong said, "I'm good at it." Yi Xian was speechless. Xue Tong said, "Take it slow." Yi Xian nodded slightly, "Take it slow." As he said this, he sighed. Ever since Xiao Ta's ability was sealed by his father, his cultivation speed had slowed to a crawl. But there was nothing he could do. For now, besides Qing, and Big Brother, there was probably no one who could undo his father's seal. Xue Tong suddenly asked, "Where are you going?" Yi Xian smiled, "I'm going to Divine Sect to deliver something." Xue Tong looked at Yi Xian, but didn't say anything. Yi Xian said, "Let's go." He was now at stage 16. If he continued to rush, it wouldn't be hard to reach stage 20. Not only did he have Divine Sect's inheritance, but he also had Xue Tong's guidance. But he didn't want to be that fast. He wanted to slow down. Sword Dao. After his epiphany, his sword intent was improved, and he used it to fuse with the 7th space. To put it simply, he wanted to improve his sword Dao. In fact, Crimson Eye was shocked at the moment. Under normal circumstances, Yi Xian should not have been able to enter the 7th space and time. However, not only could this guy enter the 7th space and time, but he could also communicate with the 7th space and time. Most importantly, this guy's sword skills were terrifying. Those sword skills could be said to have increased Yi Xian's battle strength by several times. What a mysterious guy. After a while, the two continued forward. 3 days later, the two arrived in front of a black hole. Yi Xian was about to enter when Xue Tong suddenly said, "You want to go in?" Yi Xian nodded. Xue Tong was silent. Yi Xian asked, "Dangerous?" Xue Tong looked at Yi Xian, "Can't you feel it?" Yi Xian shook his head. Xue Tong looked at Yi Xian, "How did you survive until now?" "By luck?" Yi Xian was speechless. Xue Tong looked at the black hole. The legendary level 8 civilization should be within it. With our current strength, entering it is equivalent to entering a pack of wolves. Understand? Yi Xian was slightly helpless. "Then what should we do?" "I promised someone to help deliver something." Xue Tong thought for a moment and said, "Let's just keep a low profile." As soon as she finished speaking, she walked into the black hole. Yi Xian hurriedly followed her in. A few minutes later, Yi Xian and Xue Tong appeared in an unknown starfield. Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings and said, "Let's go." As he spoke, he led Shui Tong towards the right. 2 hours later, Yi Xian arrived before a mountain range. Meanwhile, Shui Tong frowned. "There's the smell of blood." Yi Xian smelled blood as well, and he looked towards the distance. Right at this moment, a palm that was over 100 kilometers long suddenly descended from the sky above the mountain range. If this chapter isn't finished, please keep going. In an instant, the entire mountain range shook. Yi Xian's expression instantly changed. Suddenly, an enormous golden barrier of light arose from the mountain range. Bang! The palm instantly shattered upon colliding with the barrier of light, and then it transformed into nothingness. A powerful wave of energy swept towards the surroundings, and in an instant, space was obliterated. Yi Xian's face sank when he witnessed this scene. What happened? Shui Tong gazed at Yi Xian. It doesn't seem simple. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "Let's come back another day." Shui Tong nodded. Good idea. As soon as he finished speaking, they intended to flee. Right at this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian and Shui Tong. Yi Xian's expression changed slightly. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly gazed at the ring on Yi Xian's finger, and his expression instantly changed drastically. A divine ring. Yi Xian blinked. "You're from the divine sect?" The old man hurriedly bowed respectfully. "The divine sect Li Muqi greets the sect master." "Sect master?" Yi Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly said, "You've misunderstood. I'm just here to deliver the ring. I'm not your sect master." As he spoke, he was about to take off the ring. However, he noticed to his astonishment that he couldn't take it off at all. What's going on? Yi Xian was quite stunned. Li Muqi hurriedly bowed respectfully again. "Sect master, please return to the sect with me." Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. "I'm really not your sect master. I was just entrusted by your sect master to deliver the ring back to you. You absolutely must not misunderstand." Li Muqi gazed at Yi Xian. "You're wearing the sect master's ring. You're the sect master." Yi Xian was speechless. He still wanted to say something, but at this moment, a terrifying pressure suddenly enveloped him. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He raised his head to look at the sky, only to see the sky suddenly split open. Then, a shadow floated out, and that shadow looked down at him. Meanwhile, Li Muqi's expression changed drastically. "Sect master, quickly return to the sect with me." Yi Xian still wanted to say something, but Shui Tong spoke abruptly. "Listen to him and enter the protective barrier." As soon as she finished speaking, she charged towards the protective barrier. Li Muqi hurriedly brought Yi Xian along and vanished on the spot. As soon as they vanished, the area where Yi Xian stood earlier was instantly wiped out by a mysterious force. When he noticed this scene, Yi Xian's expression instantly became extremely unsightly. Soon, the three of them appeared on top of a mountain peak. Li Muqi glanced at the sky, then looked at Yi Xian. "Sect master, the 10 ultimate shrine besieged divine sect this time for our divine sect's divine ring." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "I'm not your sect master." As he spoke, he was about to take off the ring, but he couldn't take it off at all. At that moment, Li Muqi said, "The divine ring has recognized you as its master." As he spoke, he slowly knelt down. "Please protect my divine sect, sect master." Yi Xian was speechless. Damn it. Was that woman from the Divine Spirit Palace crazy? Asking me to be divine sect master, does she want me to save divine sect? But how am I supposed to save them? At that moment, Xiao Ta suddenly said, "Young master, you're too stupid. That woman doesn't want you to save divine sect, she definitely wants Sister Tianming to save divine sect." "Your divine sect master, what does that mean?" "It means that divine sect has Sister Tianming behind them. As for you, if it wasn't for Sister Tianming, she probably wouldn't even have let you through the door. You need to know what's going on." Yi Xian said indifferently, the next time I see Qing, I'll say that you're bad-mouthing her. Xiao Ta was instantly enraged. Don't slander me. Sister Tianming is my faith. Yi Xian said, do you think Qing believes you or me? After a moment of silence, Xiao Ta said, young master, I apologize for my words just now. I'm sorry. I, Xiao Ta, will be more careful with my words in the future. Please be magnanimous and let me go. Yi Xian was speechless. End of this chapter. Chapter 1900. Yi Xian was about to speak again when a group of divine sect powerhouses showed up at this moment. Yi Xian was shocked when he saw them. Wow, there were actually 9 seamless path powerhouses, and 2 of them were divine spirit realm powerhouses. This lineup was a little fierce. Li Muqi hurriedly signaled to the divine sect experts. Everyone understood and saluted respectfully. Greetings, sect master. Sect master. Yi Xian was speechless. Just as he was about to refuse, Xue Tong suddenly transmitted his voice, don't refuse. Yi Xian looked at Xue Tong and asked, why? Xue Tong said indifferently, think about it yourself. Yi Xian pondered for a moment and sighed inwardly. Divine Sect was currently besieged by powerful enemies. Since he had the Divine Sect Divine Ring, the forces outside would naturally think that he was Divine Sect Master. No matter how he explained, the forces outside wouldn't let him go. Moreover, the enemy's target was Divine Sect's Divine Ring, and it was in his hands. Most importantly, he couldn't take it off. Cut off his fingers? He had thought about it, but he found that the divine ring had fused with him. Even if he cut off his fingers, it would be useless unless he used the profound cyan sword to destroy it. Thinking of this, Yi Xian sighed softly. When he asked the divine spirit palace woman if she would trick him, she said yes. Obviously, she was referring to this. He didn't complain because he also benefited. Wanting to benefit but not doing anything, how could there be such a good thing in the world? Moreover, he needed divine sect. Thinking of this, Yi Xian looked at Li Muqi in front of him. Are you really willing to recognize me as sect master? Li Muqi hurriedly said, of course. The rest of the divine sect experts also hurriedly said, we are willing. Yi Xian smiled, I am only at the 16th phase. 16th phase. Hearing this, the expressions of the divine sect experts in front of Yi Xian became a little strange. Indeed a little weak. At this time, Li Muqi said, our divine sect is willing to recognize you as sect master. Yi Xian looked at Li Muqi. Why? Li Muqi replied in a solemn voice, because you were personally chosen by sect master Shuesheng. The expressions of the experts from the divine sect changed when they heard Li Muqi. Water sect master. In other words, he was the previous sect master of divine sect. Yi Xian said, because I was chosen by her, so you acknowledge me? Li Muqi nodded. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? Because in my opinion, she has already perished, and all of you can elect a new sect master. Li Muqi said solemnly, only with the divine ring can one become the sect master, because my divine sect's treasure, the divine seal, is within the divine ring. Yi Xian hurriedly said, I can return the divine ring to divine sect. Li Muqi shook his head. The fact that sect master Shuesheng gave the divine ring to you means that she feels that you can lead my divine sect out of this predicament. As he spoke, he and the divine sect experts respectfully bowed. We are willing to pledge our lives to sect master. Yi Xian was slightly speechless. This is like forcing a duck onto a perch. At that moment, an old man at the side suddenly said, back then, sect master Shuesheng and the temple master of 10 ultimate shrine fought. In the end, we don't know where the 2 of them went, but we know that they have perished. All these years, my divine sect and 10 ultimate shrine have always been taking revenge on each other. In the beginning, neither of us could do anything to the other, but for some reason, Divine King Valley suddenly helped 10 ultimate shrine. Since then, my divine sect could only defend passively. Shuetong suddenly said, so, Divine King Valley is the key, right? The old man shook his head. Now, even without Divine King Valley, my divine sect's overall strength is inferior to 10 Ultimate Shrine. Shuetong looked. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. He glanced at the screen of light above him. How much longer can this formation last? The old man said, a month. A month. Shuetong nodded slightly and looked at Yi Xian. You only have a month. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, tell me about the strength of my divine sect and 10 ultimate shrine. The old man said, my divine sect still has 2 divine spirit realm experts, 12 seamless realm experts, 53 seamless realm experts, and 390 level 20 experts. As for the 10 ultimate shrine, they still have 5 divine spirit experts, 37 seamless Dao experts, more than 70 seamless realm experts, and more than 500 phase 20 experts. Yi Xian's face sank when he heard that. The difference in strength is so huge. It's a terrible mess. Meanwhile, Shuetong suddenly said, their main objective is the divine ring? The old man nodded. Because there is a divine artifact and a technique within the divine ring. The divine artifact is called the divine ruler, and it has the ability to measure time and space. Besides that, there is also a supreme technique, the divine radiating scripture. Yi Xian frowned slightly. The divine radiating scripture? The old man nodded slightly. Only by cultivating this technique can one attain the fate chart realm. Yi Xian gazed at the divine ring in his hand. With a command in his heart, a thick golden ancient book suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The divine radiating scripture. All the experts of the divine sect became excited when they saw the divine radiating scripture. Yi Xian glanced at the divine radiating scripture in his hand, and then he opened it. As soon as he did, a ray of golden light shot into the center of his brows. Bang! Yi Xian's body trembled violently as a huge amount of information surged into his mind. A short moment later, Yi Xian opened his eyes, and Shuetong asked, how is it? Yi Xian gazed at Shuetong, what do you mean? Shuetong said, how is the technique? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, it seems to be just that. The expressions of all the experts of the divine sect instantly became strange. Just that? Is that something a human would say? Shuetong said, can I have a look? Yi Xian passed the divine radiating scripture to Shuetong. The expressions of all the experts of the divine sect changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and Li Muki hurriedly said, Sect Master, you mustn't. The divine radiating scripture is the supreme technique of our divine sect. Besides the sect master, no one else is allowed to see it. Yi Xian suddenly said, all of you can see it as well. All the experts of the divine sect were stunned when they heard this. Yi Xian gazed at Li Muki, all of you can see it as well. Li Muki gulped, and then he said, isn't that a bit inappropriate? Yi Xian smiled, there's nothing inappropriate about it. All of you can see it. Of course, I won't force you if you're unwilling. Li Muki hurriedly said, I'm willing. I'm willing. The other experts of the divine sect hurriedly said as well, we're willing. We're willing. Shuetong suddenly said, hurry up and thank the sect master. All the experts of the divine sect hurriedly bowed respectfully, thank you, sect master. Yi Xian smiled, and then he passed the divine radiating scripture to Shuetong, give it to them after you've seen it. Shuetong nodded and took the scripture. Yi Xian suddenly gazed at Li Muki and asked, can the divine sect summon an ancestor? Li Muki nodded, yes. However, it can only be done once. Yi Xian smiled, I can finally summon an ancestor. Li Muki was speechless. A short while later, all the experts of the divine sect had read the scripture, and it caused them to be extremely excited. After all, only the sect master could read such a supreme technique. Yet now, Yi Xian had actually allowed them to read it for free. This chapter isn't over. Please continue to the next page. What's going on? On the other side, Yi Xian took out the divine ruler. At this moment, he was studying it. After studying it for a while, he shook his head. This divine ruler was indeed not bad. It could measure time and space, and it could even manipulate time and space. However, compared to the Qingxian sword, the gap was really huge. Right at this moment, a powerful pressure suddenly pressed down from the sky. Everyone looked up and saw a man appear outside the screen of light. Li Muqi, who was beside Yi Xian, said in a low voice, "He's the current temple master of 10 Ultimate Shrine, Mu Qiu." Mu Qiu looked down at Yi Xian from the sky. "You're the current sect master of Divine Sect?" Yi Xian nodded. Mu Qiu smiled. "How interesting. They actually let a rank 16 ant be the sect master. Is there really no one else in the Divine Sect?" The expressions of the experts of the Divine Sect became slightly unsightly when they heard that. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Ancestor summon." Ancestor summon? The experts of the Divine Sect were slightly stunned. Yi Xian looked at Li Muqi, "Ancestor summon." Li Muqi hesitated for a moment and said, "Sect master, that's ancestor summon?" Yi Xian nodded. "Do you have a problem with that?" Li Muqi smiled bitterly. "Sect master, that's our final trump card." Yi Xian smiled. "Looks like all of you don't take me to be the sect master at all. Since that's the case, then I'll return the position of sect master to all of you." As soon as he finished speaking, he left with Xue Tong. The expressions of Li Muqi and the others instantly changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and one of the old men hurriedly said, "Ancestor summon." Quickly. Li Muqi hurriedly nodded, "Ancestor summon." As soon as he finished speaking, bang! A powerful aura suddenly shot into the sky from below the Divine Sect. Mu Qiu's expression instantly changed when he witnessed this scene. Is there something wrong with this new sect master? He summons ancestor summon at the slightest disagreement? Actually, it wasn't just Mu Qiu, even the experts of the Divine Sect found it hard to understand. Ancestor summon was the final trump card of the Divine Sect, and it had been used just like that. In the future, no other power would fear the Divine Sect. In the sky above the Divine Sect, an old man appeared before everyone. The Divine Sect's ancestor. The experts of the Divine Sect all knelt down. "Greetings, ancestor." The Divine Sect's ancestor swept the surroundings with his gaze. In the next moment, his gaze descended onto Yi Xian. When he saw the spatial ring on Yi Xian's finger, he frowned. "You're the current Divine Sect master?" Yi Xian nodded. "That's right." The old man frowned slightly. "Why are you so weak?" Yi Xian smiled. "You haven't matured yet." Everyone, at this moment, a trace of surprise flashed through the old man's eyes. "You," a moment later, he grinned. "Natural fate, interesting. Little fellow, you're very interesting." Yi Xian bowed slightly, then pointed at Mu Qiu. "Senior, can you kill him?" The old man turned to look at Mu Qiu, and Mu Qiu's expression instantly changed. This old man was a true Fate Realm expert. He didn't even think before turning to run. Mu Qiu raised his hand slightly, then pressed down lightly. Boom! The distant horizon suddenly exploded. Following a miserable scream, countless amounts of blood splattered. Mu Qiu's body was directly destroyed, but his soul had already escaped. The old man didn't chase after him. Instead, he appeared in front of Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian. "What's your name?" Yi Xian said, "Little fellow, Yi Xian." The old man pulled Yi Xian to the side and whispered, "How many big shots are behind you?" Yi Xian, end of this chapter. Chapter 1901. A few big shots. Yi Xian's expression was a little strange. Wasn't that a little too straightforward? The Divine Sect ancestor smiled. "Little friend, you were born with a 9-phase fate. If you didn't have a big shot behind you, you wouldn't have lived until now." Yi Xian smiled. "Senior's eyes are like torches. The divine sect ancestor looked at Yi Xian. May I know what realm the big shot behind you is at? Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, I really don't know. The divine sect ancestor was silent. Yi Xian said again, Senior, it was a coincidence that I could become the divine sect master. I hope that Senior can choose a new sect master. The old man quickly said, You are my divine sect master. Yi Xian, the old man said again, Little guy, I can still stay for a few days. Let me guide you for a few days, I hope it will be of help to you. Yi Xian said solemnly, Thank you very much. In the following time, Yi Xian began to cultivate with the old man. Under the old man's guidance, his cultivation and spatial attainments could be said to have improved by leaps and bounds. 10 Ultimate Shrine. On this day, a woman came to 10 Ultimate Shrine. The woman wore a purple dress and had shoulder-length hair. She held a sheathed longsword in her hand. The sheath was completely black and flickered with light. At this moment, 10 Ultimate Shrine Master Mu Qiu appeared in the shrine. At this moment, his body had recovered, but his face was still extremely pale. Mu Qiu glanced at the woman and then cupped his fists, Miss Mao Shi. Mao Shi. This was the most monstrous genius of Divine King Valley's current generation, born with a 3-phase fate. Mao Shi nodded slightly, Master Mu Qiu, I heard that Divine Sect has a new sect master. Mu Qiu nodded, yes. However, that person is only at phase 16, nothing to worry about. Mao Shi looked at Mu Qiu, Master Mu Qiu, do you think that Divine Sect will let a person at phase 16 be the sect master? Mu Qiu frowned. He had forgotten to think about this. Mao Shi continued, according to what I know, this person has a god ring, which means that he has obtained the approval of the previous sect master of the divine sect, Shui Sheng. Shui Sheng is a peak fate matrix expert, so how could someone who has obtained her approval be ordinary? Mu Qiu said solemnly, but that young man is really only at rank 16. Mao Shi shook his head. Most of the time, realms don't mean anything. Mu Qiu asked, then what does Miss Mao Shi think? Mao Shi said, first, get someone to investigate this person and find out his background. The second point is that the divine sect has already summoned its ancestors. They have now lost their final trump card. My master's meaning is that the divine sect should disappear. However, we need to investigate the new sect master's background first. Mu Qiu nodded. I've already sent someone to investigate. Mao Shi nodded slightly. Temple Master Mu Qiu, Master has instructed us that after we destroy the divine sect, we only want the divine ring. Everything else will belong to the 10 Ultimate Shrine. Mu Qiu replied, of course. Mao Shi nodded and turned to leave. In the hall, Mu Qiu was silent for a long time before he sighed softly. In the past, the 10 Ultimate Shrine was even stronger than the Divine King Valley. However, following the fall of the previous Temple Master, the 10 Ultimate Shrine no longer had a life matrix powerhouse. Now, the 10 Ultimate Shrine was the same as the Divine Sect, they had to obey the Divine King Valley. This was because the Divine King Valley had a life matrix powerhouse. After a while, Mu Qiu looked outside the hall and frowned slightly. Divine Ring. Why only one Divine Ring? Divine Sect. At that moment, Yi Xian was sitting cross-legged on the ground, attempting to reach rank 17. In front of Yi Xian was the Divine Sect Ancestor. The Divine Sect Ancestor sized up Yi Xian, his expression becoming more and more solemn. After interacting with Yi Xian, he realized that not only did Yi Xian have an innate life matrix, but his bloodline was also extremely powerful. He had never seen such a powerful bloodline before. He was extremely curious about Yi Xian's background. Just then, where did this second generation come from? At that moment, the Divine Sect Ancestor suddenly turned around and walked to the entrance of the hall. He looked into the distance and saw a powerful aura surging out from a nearby hall. That was the hall where Shuatong was. The Divine Sect Ancestor said in a deep voice, Divine Spirit. This girl actually reached the divine spirit realm in less than a day. Amazing. At that moment, the hall's door suddenly opened and Shuetong walked out. Shuetong greedily took a deep breath, then slowly walked to the divine sect ancestor. Above the divine spirit is life matrix, right? The old man nodded. Shuetong asked, what is life matrix? The old man said in a deep voice, life matrix is equivalent to one's own fate. How many living beings can control their own fate? Countless living beings can't escape birth, old age, sickness, and death, or natural disasters. After reaching the life matrix realm, one can slowly control their own fate. Of course, whether they can truly control their own fate is unknown. Shuetong looked into the hall. What will happen if he reaches the life matrix realm? The old man smiled. Right now, he has a natural life matrix, and he has reached phase 9. If he reaches the life matrix realm, his cultivation speed will be at least 10 times that of a normal person. Simply put, once he reaches the life matrix realm, he will be invincible among his peers. This is because normal people need to cultivate, but if he doesn't, he will directly reach phase 9. Shuetong frowned. That's not fair. The old man nodded. It is indeed not fair, but there is no such thing as absolute fairness in this world. Look at this girl's bloodline. The old man has seen the world, but this kind of bloodline is something the old man has never seen before. This girl's father is definitely not a normal person. At this point, he sighed and said, look, he was born with a good father. Aren't you angry? Shuetong took out a candied fruit and licked it, then said, I'm not angry. The old man was puzzled. Why? Shuetong said, I told him. His father is my father. The old man's face froze. Shuetong glanced at the old man, and then he said, Old man, don't panic when you don't have a formidable father. Hurry up and find one. The old man was speechless. Shuetong continued, even though I don't have a life matrix at the 9th level, he does. So, if I follow him, it'll be equivalent to me having a life matrix at the 9th level as well. When she spoke up to this point, she licked the candied fruit and said, if I can't beat him, then I'll join him. Look, under normal circumstances, I might not be able to attain the divine spirit realm, but I've attained it in less than a month by following him. Sometimes, it's useless to bury your head in hard work. The old man couldn't help but give her a thumbs up. Little girl, this old man has learned something new. Shuetong gazed at Yi Xian, who was cultivating in the hall. As long as I have a powerful backer, the world is mine. The old man was speechless. At this moment, Yi Xian, who was in the hall, suddenly stood up. As soon as he stood up, a powerful aura swept out from his body. Phase 17. Yi Xian took a deep breath. He'd attained phase 17 now. At this moment, the divine sex ancestor appeared in front of Yi Xian. He sized up Yi Xian, and then he said, How do you feel? Yi Xian opened his right hand, and a sword appeared in his hand. In the next moment, he directly entered the 7th layer of spacetime. Gradually, he completely merged with the 7th layer of spacetime. At the same time, a powerful pressure appeared in the surroundings. Spacetime pressure. A moment later, the corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. He left the 7th layer of spacetime and looked at the divine sex ancestor. Senior, I want to fight an expert of the seamless Tao. The old man hesitated for a moment, and then he said, I'm afraid it'll be a bit difficult. Yi Xian smiled, I'll give it a try. As he spoke, he looked at Shuetong, and Shuetong said indifferently, I'm already at the divine spirit realm. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said, So fast? Shuetong nodded, yes. Yi Xian's expression was slightly strange. Isn't this little girl a bit too terrifying? She reached the divine spirit realm in less than a day? Meanwhile, the old man smiled, this little girl's foundation is too solid. She was already at the peak of the seamless Tao, and she was only a step away from the divine spirit realm. But after she saw the godly radiating scripture, she understood how to step into the divine spirit realm. Of course, if she didn't have the godly radiating scripture, it would probably take some time for her to reach the divine spirit realm. Yi Xian nodded lightly, and then he looked at Xue Tong. Congratulations. Xue Tong nodded, thank you. Yi Xian smiled, and then he called over a seamless path powerhouse from the divine sect. This powerhouse was called Mu Yan, and he was a powerhouse at the peak of the seamless path. In space, Yi Xian stood with his sword in hand, and Mu Yan stood in front of him. Xue Tong and the divine sect's ancestor watched from the side. Yi Xian smiled, let's begin. As soon as he finished speaking, the sword in his hands suddenly vanished. A flying sword. This sword directly folded space and time. In the distance, Mu Yan's expression instantly changed. He hadn't expected that Yi Xian's sword would be so swift, and he immediately clenched his right hand tightly. In an instant, the space and time he resided in had transformed into a spatial wall. Bang! Yi Xian's flying sword had been blocked. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of Mu Yan, and then an expanse of sword light enveloped the space and time Mu Yan resided in. Rumble. The spatial wall exploded into pieces, and Mu Yan was blasted over 30 kilometers away. As soon as he stopped moving, a flying sword had already arrived at the center of his forehead. He lost. The divine sect's ancestor's face sank when he witnessed this scene. I underestimated his sword technique. In the distance, Yi Xian sheathed his sword and smiled. If he held the green profound sword right now, then he would even be able to kill a divine spirit realm expert. The boost from the green profound sword was too terrifying. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian gazed at Xue Tong. Miss Xue Tong, can I fully activate the energy of my bloodline? Xue Tong thought for a moment and said, yes. But it's slightly dangerous. Because your bloodline is extremely abnormal, and you might not be able to control it. Yi Xian fell silent. Just as Xue Tong had said, he knew his own bloodline very well. Once it was activated, then his mind would be corroded by killing intent. He was quite worried. Actually, he slightly understood his father's actions. If his father didn't suppress his bloodline, then once he activated it, then it would be equivalent to playing with fire and getting burned. His bloodline was too unstable. Meanwhile, Xue Tong spoke abruptly, it's fine. You can lend your blood to me in the future, and I'll activate it. I'll be very happy to serve you. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 1902. Yi Xian was speechless. Xue Tong could really borrow the power of his bloodline. In the end, he gave up on the power of his bloodline. That was because he didn't dare to activate the power of his bloodline, especially now that there were no restrictions on it. If he activated it himself, he definitely wouldn't be able to resist the erosion of the power of his bloodline. However, he was also very curious about what it would be like if the power of his bloodline was completely activated. At that moment, the divine sect master said, I still have 2 days. What do you want me to do for you? 2 days. Yi Xian was silent. He had to make good use of the divine sect ancestor's soul, or it would be a waste. Xue Tong suddenly said, you can go to the 10 ultimate shrine and self-destruct. Yi Xian was speechless. The old man glanced at Xue Tong and shook his head with a smile. It's useless. This strand of my soul is about to completely dissipate. Even if I self-destruct, it won't produce much power and won't hurt the 10 ultimate shrines foundation. Moreover, the Divine King Valley is a greater threat. Yi Xian shook his head and sighed. What a mess. The old man looked at Yi Xian and bowed slightly. Young man, please protect my divine sect. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Senior, there's no need for that. I've received benefits from divine sect, so I should help divine sect. I'll do my best. The old man smiled faintly. I'm relieved to hear this little friend's words. He hesitated for a moment before asking, Young man, is the person behind you from the mountain? Yi Xian frowned slightly. From the mountain? The old man was confused. Isn't he? Yi Xian asked, what's from the mountain? The old man said after a moment of silence, Dao Mountain. Yi Xian was confused. Dao Mountain? Where is it? The old man said in a deep voice, a very sacred place. Only those who have reached the 9th stage of life matrix realm can set foot on this mountain. Once they set foot on this mountain, they are known as the people from the mountain. When he spoke up to this point, he paused for a moment and said, I thought that the person behind you was someone from the mountain, but now it seems like that's not the case. Yi Xian was about to speak when Li Muqi suddenly appeared here, and he spoke solemnly, Ancestor, Sect Master, I just received news that something big has happened in God King Valley and the 10 Ultimate Divine Hall. A huge commotion. The old man looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, are they going to launch a large-scale attack? Li Muqi nodded. It should be. Yi Xian said, with our current strength, we definitely can't stop them, right? Li Muqi nodded. We can't. Not to mention all of them together, just the God King Valley alone is enough to destroy us. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then turned to look at Xuetong. Do you have any good ideas? Xuetong glanced at Yi Xian. Tell me your thoughts first. Yi Xian smiled and said, my idea is to scare them. Xuetong licked his candied fruit. All right. Li Muqi was quite puzzled. Scare them? They aren't easily frightened. Yi Xian said, let's give it a try. As he spoke, he gazed at Xuetong, cooperate with me. Xuetong nodded. All right. Yi Xian said, then let's head to God King Valley right now. Li Muqi was stunned. Go to the God King Valley? Yi Xian nodded. Of our own accord. Li Muqi hesitated for a moment and said, Sect Master, you. Yi Xian smiled, they'll still return if I don't go. Since that's the case, then why don't I go on my own accord? As he spoke, he gazed at the Divine Sect's ancestor, Senior, you guard this place. The Divine Sect's ancestor spoke in a low voice, little fellow, are you confident? Yi Xian smiled, I'm not. However, I can give it a try. The Divine Sect's ancestor hesitated for a moment before he said, be careful. Yi Xian nodded. I will. Green City, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestor, Yi Xian lacks talent and virtue. From this moment onward, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be removed, and Yi Lang shall succeed him. It was an old man in black robes who spoke. A young man stood not too far away from the old man, and he had a faint smile on the corners of his mouth. It was Yi Lang. The Yi clan's elders stood at his sides. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone looked towards the source of the voice and saw a young girl standing at the entrance. She was around 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the corners of her dress. Her face was sickly pale, and she seemed slightly weak. Moreover, there was a trace of timidity in her eyes. The young girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan intended to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned, Yi Ling, what are you doing? The young girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a prince. Why did you remove his title for no reason? The Great Elder looked coldly at Yi Ling, this is a clan matter, what are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look directly at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave, and mustered her courage to enter the ancestral hall. She once again bowed to the elders on both sides, Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He's fighting for the clan, and we don't even know if he's dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to remove his title. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged, whether or not he is removed, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this moment, the newly appointed Prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder said coldly, then flog 30 times. Soon, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the newly appointed Prince Yi Lang, and he knew that this was his chance to show off. The guard sneered, young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of prince, and it's everyone's wish. What are you shouting for? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and said with a smile, what's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed, subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, you're very good. After I become the crown prince, I'll need 10 guards. From now on, you'll be my guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and hurriedly bowed deeply. I'll go through fire and water for the crown prince, and I'll do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded slightly, drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show any mercy, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. Immediately, he grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the South Mountain. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his expression was frighteningly dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak, when Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him, and snarled, your man? As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's appearance, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed out, brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yiling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yiling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yiling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a prince, why did you discard him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yiling coldly, this is a matter of the clan, why are you interrupting? Leave. Yiling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged, discard him or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed, you should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog her 30 times. Soon, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now, he is risking his life for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry. She only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, what's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed, subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded, you're not bad. After I become the prince, I will need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply, this subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince. Yi Lang nodded, drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Do you understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a sinister smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, his face dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him and said, your man? As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me." Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked up to Yi Ling, seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 1903. Mu Qiu was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Was that something a human would say? Xue Tong lowered his head slightly as the corners of his mouth curled up. He had so many backers. Nice. At this moment, Yi Xian sighed in a low voice. I also want to live a normal life, but I can't. He glanced at Mu Qiu. I'm in pain. Do you understand? Mu Qiu stared at Yi Xian. His gaze was like a sword, as if he wanted to cut Yi Xian into 1,000 pieces. Yi Xian spread his hands. Come, kill me. I won't fight back. Mu Qiu clenched his fists as his entire body trembled. Yi Xian said angrily, What are you looking at? Come and kill me. Come here. Mu Qiu's expression became ferocious. Yi Xian said angrily, I beg you to kill me. Xue Tong was speechless. Mu Qiu's expression suddenly calmed down. He glanced at the Divine King Valley below before looking at Yi Xian. I won't kill you. I'll piss you off. After saying that, he left with the 10 ultimate shrine powerhouses. Yi Xian looked at Xue Tong and sighed. It's really painful to be a second-generation heir. It's really. Xue Tong suddenly punched Yi Xian's face. Bang! Yi Xian flew thousands of feet away. Xue Tong licked her sugar-coated hawes and glanced at Yi Xian in the distance. You'll be struck by lightning sooner or later. Yi Xian was speechless. On the other side, Mu Qiu's expression was extremely ugly. A 10 ultimate shrine elder beside Mu Qiu said in a deep voice, Temple Master, Yi Xian is too arrogant. Mu Qiu said coldly, he has the right to be arrogant. The Divine King Valley must be afraid of him if they don't touch him. If the 10 ultimate shrine touches him, I'm afraid we won't be able to die straight away. The elder asked in a deep voice, what should we do now? After a moment of silence, Mu Qiu said, let's wait and see. If God King Valley doesn't make a move, then we won't. With that, he turned around and left. Yi Xian and Xue Tong returned to Divine Sect. Yi Xian continued to cultivate, and now, he is trying to enter the 8th spacetime. Seamless spacetime. As soon as he entered the 8th spacetime continuum, he felt an extremely terrifying spacetime pressure. Not only that, there was a person who looked exactly like him standing in front of him. At this moment, Divine Sect's ancestor appeared beside Yi Xian. He looked at Yi Xian, do you know what seamless is? Yi Xian shook his head. God's Sect ancestor said solemnly, the so-called infinity is the infinity of time and space. In this space, time and space are limitless. Not only is it limitless, but it is also a mirror image. The person you see in front of you is actually you. As he spoke, he opened his palm and swept it lightly. In an instant, countless figures of him appeared here. Yi Xian was a little surprised, this is? God's Sect ancestor said, each spacetime continuum is a different world. The core of the 8th spacetime continuum is the mirror image duplication. You can use spacetime to duplicate a mirror image. Of course, it is very difficult to do this. Even some divine spirit realm experts can't do it. Yi Xian was a little confused, why is it difficult? God's Sect ancestor said, because first, you have to merge with the 8th spacetime continuum and then use the special characteristics of the 8th spacetime to duplicate a mirror image. Generally, those who can do this are at least in the life matrix realm. Divine Spirit Realm experts can at most use spacetime pressure and spacetime folding functions. At this point, he paused and said, with your current strength, it is still very difficult to merge with the 8th spacetime continuum. Yi Xian sighed softly. At this moment, he felt that it was really difficult. If the enemies were of the same level, he really wouldn't be afraid, but the problem was that the enemies were several levels higher than him. One must know that those people on the mountain had their eyes on him, and those people on the mountain were at least in the 9th level of the Life Matrix realm. The 9th level of the Life Matrix realm. How to play? He felt a little helpless now. At this moment, Li Muki appeared and said in a low voice, Divine King Valley and 10 Ultimate Shrine are not moving. Yi Xian said softly, they are waiting for the people on the mountain to come down. God's Sect Ancestor said in a low voice, little guy, you were born with a 9th level life matrix. This is too attractive to those people on the mountain. 10 Ultimate Shrine and Divine King Valley don't dare to touch you, but the people on the mountain won't care. Yi Xian looked at God's Sect Ancestor, Senior, do you know much about this Dao Mountain? God's Sect Ancestor shook his head, not much. Because I didn't go up the mountain in the past. Yi Xian was a little confused, why? God's Sect Ancestor was a little helpless, because you don't have the qualifications. Yi Xian was speechless. A moment later, God's Sect Ancestor and Li Muki left. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, deep in thought. He could already guess what would happen next. The people on the mountain would come down to find him, and he couldn't beat them. At the crucial moment of life and death, either his dad, Qing, or his big brother would come out. In any case, this was the plan from before. It was as if he, Yi Xian, had been arranged by fate. Rely on himself? He really wanted to rely on himself, but for now, even if the Azure Profound Sword was unsealed, he definitely couldn't beat a 9th level life matrix. They weren't on the same level at all, unless his bloodline was completely unsealed. However, other than his dad and Qing, no one could completely unseal his bloodline power. Moreover, even if it was unsealed, he couldn't control such a terrifying demonic bloodline with his strength. Yi Xian thought for a long time, Dad, I also want to rely on myself to solve everything, but the enemy is too strong. I really can't do it. I know you don't want me to be someone who relies on my dad. Don't worry, I won't rely on my dad. After saying that, he stood up and left. Xiao Ta suddenly said, Young master, are you really not going to rely on your dad anymore? Yi Xian nodded. I can't rely on my dad anymore. Otherwise, he'll look down on me. Xiao Ta said in a low voice, What will you do if the people on the mountain come looking for you? Yi Xian frowned. Don't I still have my sister? Xiao Ta was speechless. Yi Xian came to the peak of a mountain and sat cross-legged on the ground. He slowly closed his eyes to sense the Azure Profound Sword. Soon, he felt the Azure Profound Sword in his sea of consciousness. At that moment, the Azure Profound Sword was locked by a ray of sword light, and it was his dad's sword light. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Qing, you forged this sword. I know you can hear me. I want you to help me unseal the Azure Profound Sword. Before he could finish, the Azure Profound Sword shook violently. Boom! The ray of sword light that locked the Azure Profound Sword shattered. Then, the Azure Profound Sword appeared in front of him. Yi Xian was stunned and then said, My sister. At that moment, Xiao Ta suddenly said excitedly, Young master, the seal that master left in my body has been unsealed. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Little soul, can you contact Qing? After a moment of silence, Little soul said, Young master, I can't contact her. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, If you can't contact her, then forget it. Then, he looked at the Azure Profound Sword in his hand and entered Xiao Ta's body. In Xiao Ta's body, Yi Xian entered the 8th spacetime. As soon as he entered the 8th spacetime, he used the Azure Profound Sword to fuse himself with the 8th spacetime. At the same time, countless mirror images appeared. With the Azure Profound Sword, the eighth spacetime was like his son. He could do whatever he wanted. It felt so good. Xiao Ta suddenly said, "Young master, aren't you afraid that you'll rely on external forces?" Yi Xian smiled. "Xiao Ta, do you think relying on external forces or living is more important?" Xiao Ta replied, "Living." Yi Xian spoke softly, "I have to live first. Obviously, my father only wants to train me, but he hasn't thought about how I should live." He paused for a moment and said, "Xiao Ta, what do you think my father was thinking by sending me to such a dangerous place?" Xiao Ta hesitated for a moment and said, "Master might be thinking that he'll give birth to another one if you die." Yi Xian's face froze. A short while later, Yi Xian used the Azure Profound Sword to arrive at the ninth spacetime. As soon as he entered the ninth spacetime, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. At this moment, he was in an unknown starry sky. It was deathly silent all around him, and he could see countless stars. However, they were far beyond his reach. Right at this moment, an old man in a gray robe appeared before Yi Xian. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. "There's someone else here?" The old man looked at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "You are?" The old man suddenly looked at the sword in Yi Xian's hand, and he frowned when he saw it. "You." Yi Xian hurriedly passed the Azure Profound Sword to the old man. "Take a good look. You must take a good look. Damn it, I'm afraid I'll be killed by you." The old man picked up the Azure Profound Sword. A short while later, his expression became extremely solemn, and he looked at Yi Xian. "Who forged this sword?" Yi Xian said, "My younger sister." The old man frowned slightly. "Your younger sister?" Yi Xian nodded. The old man fell silent for a long time. "You. What are you doing here?" Yi Xian said, "Sightseeing." The old man shook his head. "It's dangerous. You should go back." Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "Senior, you can use this sword to find the person who forged it. You can give it a try." Xiao Ta was speechless. "Damn it, this young master is too evil. He's starting to dig a hole for me." The gray-robed old man fell silent for a moment before he said, "The old man would like to see the person who forged the sword as well." As he spoke, he held the green profound sword in a reverse grip. In the next moment, the green profound sword started to tremble violently, and the surrounding space actually started to become illusory. A moment later, he suddenly clenched his right hand tightly and shouted, "Come out." As soon as he finished speaking, the space in front of him suddenly split open. In the next moment, a ray of light suddenly stabbed into the center of his forehead. At the same time, the ninth layer of space in an area of hundreds of thousands of kilometers was directly obliterated. The gray-robed elder's eyes widened in disbelief. "I was King insta-killed?" Just as the gray-robed old man was about to disappear completely, Yi Xian hastily shouted, "Show mercy. This senior is with me, he's one of us." Just as he finished speaking, the sword light between the gray-robed old man's eyebrows suddenly disappeared. The gray-robed old man's expression froze. His intuition told him that he had been tricked. Chapter 1904. At this moment, the gray-robed elder's heart could be said to be extremely shocked. He had almost been wiped out just now. He did not even have the strength to fight back. He was at the 10th stage of the life chart realm. He was a genuine 10th stage life chart realm cultivator. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Sir, are you all right?" The gray-robed old man came back to his senses. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'm not worthy of being called senior. I'm Yao Jun, the keeper of the ninth spacetime order." Yi Xian cupped his fists. Senior Jun, did not hold back. This, Yao Jun shook his head. No, it's my fault. I offended that senior. It's my fault. As he spoke, he hesitated for a moment before he said, "Young brother, who is that senior?" Yi Xian smiled. "What do you think?" Yao Jun was silent. He had not found the plain-dressed woman just now, but she had already sensed his presence. She had swung her sword from an unknown number of universes away, and he had almost been killed instantly. The strength of this strength had completely exceeded his understanding. This was also what he feared the most. He was at the 10th stage of the life realm, a true powerhouse. Although he was not invincible, he was still a rare opponent. However, he had almost been killed in an instant. It was too terrifying. Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Senior Jun, you said that you're the keeper of the 9th spacetime order?" Yao Jun nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian asked, "You're in charge of this spacetime?" Yao Jun hurriedly shook his head. No, I'm just a keeper of this spacetime order. The real keeper of this spacetime is the temporal temple." Yi Xian frowned. "The temporal temple?" Yao Jun nodded. The 9th layer of spacetime is very complicated, because this spacetime is currently limitless, endlessly large, and its density is also endlessly large. Not only can it not be folded, it can't be twisted. It's as if this spacetime is fixed. As for the temporal temple, they specialize in researching the 9th layer of spacetime. Yi Xian asked in a low voice, "That means there's no 10th spacetime?" Yao Jun nodded. "We haven't found it yet." Yi Xian was silent for a moment before looking at the azure profound sword in his hand. "Little soul, can you feel the 10th spacetime?" Little soul trembled slightly. After a moment, Little soul said, "I can feel it." Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Yao Jun's face was filled with disbelief. "This is impossible. This is absolutely impossible." Yi Xian smiled. "Why not?" Yao Jun said in a deep voice. "The temporal temple has been to study the 9th spacetime for countless years, but we have yet to find the 10th spacetime order." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Senior, is it very difficult to distort the 9th space and time?" Yao Jun nodded. "It's not just difficult. In our opinion, it's simply impossible because the spacetime density is simply too thick." At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly held the Qingxian sword in his hand and gently guided it. In an instant, the space in front of him directly distorted. "Senior Jun, it doesn't seem difficult." Yi Xian smiled. Yi Xian smiled. "Mr. Jun, it doesn't seem that difficult." Yao Jun was speechless. At this moment, Yao Jun's expression was incomparably solemn, and his heart was in turmoil. This human could distort the 9th spacetime order? It was too terrifying. Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Senior Jun, do you know Dao Mountain?" Yao Jun nodded. "I know about Dao Yi." "What's wrong?" Yi Xian smiled. "Nothing. I just have some conflicts with them. They want to take my fate." Yao Jun was stunned, then said in shock, "How dare they?" Yi Xian sighed. "They are weak. Who else can they bully?" Yao Jun glanced at Yi Xian, and then he said, "My young friend, if that senior had acted just now, then wouldn't this mountain of the way have been obliterated with a flick of her finger?" Yi Xian said, "How can I rely on others? I have to rely on myself." Yao Jun Yi Xian asked again. "Senior Jun, I'm leaving." Yao Jun hesitated. "Take care, little friend." Yi Xian nodded. Then he turned around and disappeared. After Yi Xian left, Yao Jun immediately turned around and left. Not long after, he arrived at the Time and Space Palace. There were close to 100 time and space teleportation arrays in the palace, and a middle-aged man was sitting at the top of the palace. He was the temple master, Si Qian. Yao Jun walked to Si Qian and bowed. Then, he told him what had happened. Si Qian put down an ancient book and looked at Yao Jun. "You were almost killed from countless universes?" Yao Jun nodded. "Yes. Most importantly, that young man could distort the 9th spacetime order." He did it with ease. Si Qian narrowed his eyes. Really? Yao Jun said in a low voice, absolutely. However, he probably did it with the sword in his hand. Si Qian stood up. Where is he now? Yao Jun said, he left. Si Qian was stunned. Then, he flew into a rage. Left? How could you let him leave? Yao Jun smiled bitterly. He said he wanted to leave. I didn't dare to stop him. I was afraid he would ask someone to kill me. Si Qian. Yao Jun hesitated. Temple Master Si Qian, what kind of divine being is that young man? Si Qian shook his head. How would I know? He looked at Yao Jun, find that young man immediately. If you find him, invite him to the temporal temple. Yao Jun said in a low voice, there's one more thing. Dao Shan has his eyes on him. They want to take away his fate. Si Qian frowned. Is Dao Shan crazy? Yao Jun said, Dao Shan probably doesn't know the strength of the person behind him. Temple Master, if Dao Shan really attacks him, what should we do? Should we wait and see, or? Si Qian fell silent for a long time. If that young man can deal with it himself, we won't care. If he can't, we'll take action. Yao Jun frowned. Offend Dao Shan? Si Qian said softly, it's worth it. Yao Jun nodded. Understood. Then, he turned and left. After Yi Xian left the 9th layer of space, he entered Shao Ta and started cultivating. Shao Ta had been unsealed. 10 years inside was equivalent to 1 day outside. Now, he could use Shao Ta to close the gap in strength between him and his enemies. With the Qingxian sword, Yi Xian directly merged with the 8th layer of time and space. Not only that, but he was also immune to the 8th layer of time and space's power of time and space. Most importantly, after using the Qingxian sword, he could directly fold time and space 4 times. In other words, although he was only at the 17th layer, he could easily kill someone at the Divine Spirit realm. He could even fight someone at the Fate Chart realm. But the problem was that everyone on the mountain was at least at the 9th layer. Thinking of this gave him a headache. But now, he couldn't think about anything else. His top priority was to improve his strength. With the green profound sword and Shao Ta, it was very easy to improve his strength. Not long after, Shuetong also entered Shao Ta to cultivate. After discovering Shao Ta's heaven-defying ability, Shuetong didn't leave. He stayed in the tower to cultivate every day. A few days later. A few days outside was 10 years inside Shao Ta. Yi Xian had reached the 19th layer. Not only that, he also used the green profound sword to perfectly merge with the 9th layer of space. He could now fold the 9th layer of space. To enter the 9th layer of space, only those at the Fate Chart realm could do it. To merge with the 9th layer of space was an impossible task, but he did it with the green profound sword. Right now, he didn't even know what level his battle prowess had reached. 10 days later, Yi Xian reached the Seamless realm. He was getting more and more adept at using the spacetime Dao. He could now overlap 1 to 8 layers of space. On this day, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in the sky above Divine Sect. The experts of Divine Sect all looked up. In the sky, the middle-aged man swept his gaze over Divine Sect. Where is Yi Xian? The moment he finished speaking, a sword beam appeared in front of the middle-aged man. The person who had come was Yi Xian. The middle-aged man sized up Yi Xian and narrowed his eyes. You really do have a special bloodline, and you're born with a 9th layer fate. Yi Xian glanced at the middle-aged man. Someone from the mountain? The middle-aged man nodded. Someone from the mountain. Yi Xian's expression darkened. This guy had a 9th layer fate. At this moment, the middle-aged man suddenly said, God King Valley's Valley Master Twilight Valley told me that you come from a low-level civilization. This is truly interesting. A low-level civilization actually produced a person with a special bloodline, and one with an innate ninth-stage fate providence. It's not just interesting. Yi Xian smiled. Did you come here to strip me of my bloodline and fate? The middle-aged man nodded. Yes. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, Sir, I won't hide it from you. There's someone behind me. The middle-aged man smiled. I know there's someone behind you, but so what? Yi Xian smiled. Sir, do you not want to see the person behind me? The middle-aged man's lips curled up. Are you threatening me? Yi Xian shook his head. No, I just feel that you should take a look first before deciding whether or not to kill me. The middle-aged man stared at Yi Xian for a few moments before smiling. Then I'll take a look. Yi Xian hurriedly presented the azure sword to the middle-aged man. Sir, the person behind me is the person who forged this sword. With your strength, you can definitely use this sword to find the person behind me. Please begin. The middle-aged man glanced at the azure sword in Yi Xian's hand, and his eyes quickly narrowed. Your sword is rather extraordinary. Yi Xian smiled and said nothing. The middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian and then said, Then let me see just who the person behind you is. As he spoke, he suddenly held the green profound sword in his right hand. In an instant, the space in the surroundings started to tremble. After a short moment, the middle-aged man suddenly raised his head, and as soon as he raised his head, a sword pierced directly into the center of his forehead before piercing all the way down. Boom! The middle-aged man's eyes went wide, and his mind went blank. How the fuck did I get instantly killed? Chapter 1905. Dead. Even in death, the middle-aged man did not understand how he had died. On the side, Yi Xian put away the azure profound sword and then returned to the Shao Ta to continue cultivating. Down below, the divine sect experts glanced at each other, dumbfounded. God King Valley. Within the tree hall, Twilight Valley reclined on a rattan chair, his right foot crossed over his left. His eyes were half closed, and his right hand was lightly tapping the chair beside him. At this moment, Mao Shi entered the tree hall, her expression gloomy. Master, that person on the mountain has died. Twilight Valley's tapping finger stopped, and after a few moments, she softly asked, How did he die? Mao Shi hesitated, then said, It said that he touched the sword in Yi Xian's hand, and then he was silently erased. Twilight Valley's brow creased. Touched the sword? Mao Shi nodded. Yes. After a long silence, Twilight Valley softly said, Although this person is not from the mountain, he is still no ordinary person. Mao Shi sternly said, Master, I carefully investigated this person. He came from a level 2 civilization. Twilight Valley suddenly shook his head. This means that this person is not simple. Mao Shi nodded. Truly. This person has many mysteries, especially the sword in his hand. It's said that when he wields the sword, he is immune to the pressure of spacetime and the spacetime abyss. Twilight Valley narrowed his eyes. Is that true? Mao Shi nodded. It should be true. After a long silence, Twilight Valley said, The person on the mountain will not give up. Continue watching. Mao Shi nodded and then withdrew. 10 Extreme Divine Palace. At this time, Mu Qiu had learned that the person on the mountain had died. Upon learning this news, he heaved a sigh of relief. Rejoice. He was very glad that he had not let his head get to work and attacked Yi Xian. Otherwise, he might have been dead. A second generation. That bastard really was a second generation. Within the Shao Ta, on this day, Yi Xian suddenly stopped cultivating. A moment later, he vanished, and when he reappeared, he was in front of Xuetong. When he saw Xuetong, Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Crimson Eye had already reached the life matrix realm. Xuetong slowly withdrew a candied hawthorn when she saw Yi Xian, and then she licked it and said, You seem very surprised. You've reached the Fate Realms so quickly? Asked Yi Xian. Crimson Eye blinked. Is it that fast? Yi Xian was stunned, and then he shook his head and smiled. He suddenly recalled that although only 7 or 8 days had passed in the outside world, 70 or 80 years had passed in Xiao Ta's body. However, even so, it was still very fast. This Crimson Eye was not simple. Blood Eye suddenly asked, You reached stage 20? Yi Xian nodded. He had already reached level 20. Ever since Xiao Ta was unsealed, his cultivation speed was simply incredible. Suddenly, Xue Tong opened her palm, and the God-radiating scripture appeared in her hand. She looked at Yi Xian. This is not bad, do you want it? Yi Xian looked at the God-radiating scripture. I think this was originally mine, right? Xue Tong blinked, and then she passed it to Yi Xian. What I mean is, if you don't want it, then you can give it to me. Yi Xian put away the God-radiating scripture. This little girl is very naughty. At this time, Xue Tong asked again, Can you lend me your sword to play with? Yi Xian opened his palm, and the azure sword appeared in his hand. He looked at Xue Tong and smiled. You want to play with this sword? Xue Tong nodded. Just to have a look. Yi Xian smiled, and then he passed the azure sword to Xue Tong. Xue Tong held the azure sword, and after a while, she frowned. No reaction. Yi Xian smiled. This sword can only be used by me. Xue Tong glanced at Yi Xian, and then she returned the sword to Yi Xian. Your sister made it for you? Yi Xian nodded. Xue Tong licked the candied fruit, and then she said, Ask her to make one for me as well. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he asked, Why? Xue Tong said seriously, Didn't I tell you before? If your father is my father, then isn't your sister my sister? Yi Xian was speechless. Xue Tong asked again, Is there a problem? Yi Xian chuckled. What do you think? Xue Tong thought for a moment, and then she said, I'm strong, and I can fight for you. So, helping me is equivalent to helping yourself. Yi Xian patted Xue Tong on the shoulder. I made my fortune by conning people. He turned and left as soon as he finished speaking. Xue Tong continued to lick the candied fruit in silence. In the following time, Yi Xian started to try to break through to the seamless state. In fact, after the azure sword was unsealed, cultivation wasn't that important to him anymore. For example, even a 10th stage life matrix expert couldn't shake the 9th stage of time and space, but he could. However, he still had to go through this process. As for the problem of relying on external objects, he didn't want to think about it anymore. All he wanted now was to survive. If he really followed his father's method, he would be killed by the cruel reality sooner or later. But Yi Xian didn't know that the people of the Temporal Temple were frantically looking for him. One could enter the 9th stage of time and space from any world, so when Yi Xian left the 9th stage of time and space, Yao Jun was a little annoyed. This was because he realized that he had no idea which universe Yi Xian was in. After knowing that Yi Xian could distort the 9th stage of time and space, all the experts of the Temporal Temple were excited. They had researched for their entire lives just to understand the 9th stage of time and space, but there was almost no progress. The 9th stage of time and space was a barrier for all life matrix experts. But Brother Xiao Yun is now a 6th stage fate. As for the person behind sect leader Yi, in terms of background, who is stronger than you, Brother Xiao Yun? Xiao Yun laughed and said, Miss Lin Yao, you're making me a little arrogant. Lin Yao glanced at Xiao Yun and didn't speak. Xiao Yun suddenly smiled and said, he was born with a 9th stage fate chart, and he even possesses a special bloodline. Miss Lin Yao, if you obtain his fate chart and devour his bloodline, TSK. When he spoke up to here, he didn't continue. Lin Yao smiled lightly and said, Young Master Xiao Yun, aren't you tempted? Although your Yen clan's bloodline is number 1, I heard that sect leader Ye's bloodline is extremely special. If you devour his bloodline, then perhaps your bloodline will be able to suppress the entire Shao clan. Moreover, sect leader Yi was born with a 9th stage fate chart. If you can obtain it, TSK. When they spoke up to hear, the two of them looked at each other and smiled, each with their own thoughts. At this moment, the space in the distance suddenly trembled, and in the next moment, a man walked out. The man had long hair that draped over his shoulders, and he wore an evil smile on his face. Lin Yao smiled lightly when she saw the man, so it's brother Yang Feng. The man called Yang Feng smiled and said, I thought I was late. I never expected that both of you wouldn't make a move. What? Were you waiting for me? Xiaoyun smiled and said, Brother Yang Feng, the two of us are slightly fearful, so we don't dare to make a move. Yang Feng roared with laughter, What? You want me to go first? Xiaoyun smiled, As you wish. Yang Feng glanced at them, and then he shook his head with disdain, Both of you are really tired of living. It's such a simple matter, yet you keep thinking about it. How boring. If both of you aren't going to make a move, then I will. As he spoke, he turned around and looked down, and then he stomped his right foot against the ground and roared with laughter, Yi Xian, I know you're spying on us from the shadows. Quickly come out here and let me beat you to death. His voice rumbled like thunder and shook the sky. As Yang Feng roared with laughter, Yi Xian walked out slowly, and he smiled as he walked over to Yang Feng, All right. As he spoke, his figure instantly became ethereal. In the next moment, he'd entered the 9th level of space. After that, everyone watched as he swung his sword lightly, and the 9th level of space warped. The expressions of Lin Feng and the others changed drastically when they witnessed this scene. The 9th level of space was warped. Yi Xian glanced at Yang Feng, Xiaoyun, and Lin Yao, and he smiled, The three of you can come at me together. As he spoke, he gazed at Yang Feng and grinned, I'll believe you if you attack me twice. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.